Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, John, and with me I have some very special guests. Returning this week is the wonderful Amy, as you can see below, and I'm also joined by my good friend Bronsterys, or John B, as we know him, and we're going to talk a wonderful movie, my favorite film of 2019, Little Women. So welcome, guys.
It's great to be here, John. It's my favorite movie of 2019 as well.
It's my second favorite movie because Detective Pikachu really spoke to my soul. No, I'm just kidding. Little Women, absolutely my favorite movie of 2019. And just a disclaimer for those watching, I'm going to call our lovely host John W. or J-Dubs. And then other John is going to be John B. But they can obviously talk to each other and you won't be confused.
Yeah.
The two Johns.
So, yeah. John B. B is for Bronsterys.
Yeah, I think Kate has kind of nailed it on the head there.
Darn, I forgot to. I was going to pour some OJ and give you a hard time, J-Dubs, and I forgot to. Darn.
I actually, surprisingly, I do not have orange juice today. I have plain old water, but that's okay. I wanted to actually start off just by mentioning something. And today is actually the first time that my stream has a new name. The channel is still, good old John Webster Film, but I've renamed these main discussions Cinematic Realms. Which realm having sort of a double meaning with, obviously I love my fantasy stories. So realm is very evocative of that, but also, realms for fields of study. And so it kind of gives an overarching view of what these discussions are all about. And I want to thank Amy here for coming up with that wonderful name, because I was struggling to come up with something and she nailed it right on the head. So thank you.
Thank you, J-Dubs. That's very sweet. What the audience doesn't know is I gave you like 10 or 15 options. So it was a brilliant idea out of a bunch of turds, honestly.
But you know what? But it's the one that's chosen.
You just need that one title and then you're good.
Okay. So just going to start out by go ahead and introduce yourselves. Amy, you were just here last week, but obviously if there's anybody tuned in who wasn't here, just both of you guys say a little bit about what you do and what you have going on.
Go ahead and go first, John B.
Okay. Well, I mostly analyze A Song of Ice and Fire. That's how I met these two. I write essays about it on a website called Red Mice at Play. And I, in the past, made videos about it and those videos are on a YouTube channel called the Bronsterys YouTube channel. And on Twitter, you can find me at Bronst6. And I love movies, and it was just so wonderful to meet John W. and talk about movies, and we have a lot of movies that we love in common, and so it's just I'm very grateful that he wants to have me on to talk about these movies that we both love.
Yeah, spoiler alert, there's going to be many more to come in the future.
Wonderful.
Hi, yeah, hopefully you saw me yesterday on the Unspun Yarn with Nessie talking about monkeys. My name is Amy. My blogging name is Amy Blackfire. That's AEMY. And hopefully you can find my blog and Twitter link in this description. Yep. And yeah, I just started a blog, my premiere essay. I swear next week it's coming out, J-Dubs. I know I keep saying it's coming out next week and it never seems to, but it's going to be about Tyrion and demon monkey imagery and Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, from a very famous Chinese novel. And I'm hoping to do a lot of what I think is a whole kind of missing in the fandom, which is looking at non-Western imagery in Aswath, really looking at, some Hindu mythology, some, East Asian Chinese imagery. So I'm hoping to kind of fill in a blank that I've seen in the fandom. And I'm a student of I'm a PhD student of Chinese literature. So I found myself somewhat uniquely qualified to write about this. And I'm just really excited to get my ideas out there, and hopefully there will be some nice constructive criticism from the fandom to make me even better. Yeah, and I look forward to talking about this movie. J-Dubs knows this. I'm a show person. I will watch 15 seasons of Supernatural and then go, a 2-hour movie? I don't know if I have time for that. It's a very strange mindset, but I'm getting a lot more into movies because of John. I'm also starting to J-Dubs, sorry. And I'm also starting to kind of notice the small things, little cinematography things, and, editing cuts, that kind of stuff. J-Dubs has really, I think, helped me hone my movie, cinephile eye. So I'm really excited to talk about this movie, obviously, in particular, because it's about, growing up as a young girl, basically, which I have experience with.
Yes, and my scheme to turn you into a movie fan has only just begun.
It's going well. It's going well, too, so far. I have to say, anybody. Oh, and just a shout out, if you have not seen the Kira stream where me, John, and and our other fellow knight of Kira, Jared, we 3 hours of all Kira love. It is wonderful. We had a great time, and so you absolutely have to check that out if you haven't already. So retro plug for that video.
Yes, please do. Do you mean there's people who haven't watched it yet? I just assumed everybody did.
I mean, it's so wrong if they haven't, but they need to get on that.
Yeah, I do want to say also, I got to sing the praises of your stream yesterday with Nessie. I mean, that was really phenomenal, Amy. And yes, I am impatiently waiting for your essay. I got to debut my, in the Slack yesterday, the Sonic the Hedgehog emoji with him tapping his foot, waiting for you to finish. So yeah, we're all looking forward to that. And
it's there, just a couple more paragraphs, final edits. I'm hoping to have a couple of people that I respect very much take a look at it and give me some comments before I make it live. So
excellent. Okay, so Little Women. What were your guys' initial reactions to this? And did you come to this movie fresh, or had you already been exposed to the story before?
You go ahead.
I'll go ahead. Thanks. So actually it was pop culturally kind of knowledgeable about it, and that I knew that it was about these sisters, and growing up during the Civil War, and that I knew it was from an Alcott novel, and I knew that it was kind of a novel within a novel. There was one, of the sisters who was writing about their experiences. It's kind of a little meta. So I knew that, and my mom, she was growing up, she loved the book, and so she would talk about little things here and there, specifically really memorable scenes, such as the scene where Jo cuts off all her hair, right, to help her family. These kinds of scenes where, like, oh my gosh, as a young girl with long hair, you're like, oh, that's such a sacrifice. It would be now too if I cut off my hair. So, so I kind of learned through my mom about Little Women, but other than that, this was my first exposure to the story through this movie.
I hadn't read the book. I had seen the earlier Little Women movie, which I think had Winona Ryder as Jo, but I saw it a long time ago and didn't remember it very well. So it wasn't new to me, but what I had in my mind was kind of the image of the story. And I thought that this version was very, very interesting in that it recreated that image, but also kind of subverted it and complicated it. The image being this kind of very sweet, kind of hazy glow of this idyllic childhood, and a very, very positive, warm message, but relatively uncomplicated message. And this version, I think, it shows you that warmth and that kind of idyllic picture of childhood, but it shows you much more, and it's really not at all straightforward and just only sweet. There's a lot of kind of balance between that sweetness and other themes, more serious, even darker themes at times that I thought was magnificent.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. The film starts off with a quote from Alcott where she says, "I've had lots of trouble, so I write jolly tales." And the movie is not entirely jolly, because there's a lot of,
there's a war going on. Americans are fighting each other. I mean, it's, the Civil War was a hard time. So, it's realistic to show that.
That's a great point, Amy. Right, the Civil War, probably the most horrific war in American history, and that's just one of the many things that's not jolly about this. There are tons of things in their own lives that aren't jolly. But actually, John, I thought a bunch about that, because you're absolutely right. Right, I write jolly tales. I've had lots of troubles, so I write jolly tales. In a way, right from the start, it introduces this idea of a disconnect between reality and the story.
Yeah.
Right? The story is going to be one thing, but reality is another. And they find a way within the story to communicate that what you're seeing in the story is not necessarily the same thing as reality, and that to the extent that the story is jolly, that doesn't mean that the people creating the story think that reality is jolly. They find a way within the story to comment on the story, and within the story to sort of let you know that they see life in a much more nuanced way than the sort of traditional image of Little Women.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can't avoid it. We'll just jump right into the sort of framing device of the film, because it's such a big part of, I mean, this is the only version of the film I've seen, but from my understanding, yeah, it's very unique to this version where you have essentially, by the end of the film, you realize that what we're seeing is, in fact, I mean, not wholly, but a large part of what we're seeing is Joe's writing of the story. And I think that the way the film is shot also delves into a lot of that. The sort of colder elements are reality, and then you have the warmer elements, which are either at first we think just sort of what has happened, or flashbacks, quote unquote, but could rather be that's how we see the story that's being told. And then by the end of the film, when we see things that, from my understanding, are fiction, that warm color returns for those scenes. And so it's really interesting. I know Greta Gerwig said that what she wanted to do with this film was kind of give an ending that Louisa May Alcott may have wanted originally, but was kind of pressured in the exact same way that Joe is pressured in this film to give, a quote unquote happy ending. Although I find the ending to this film to be incredibly happy with its final shots, just the way that
the accomplishment that she has from having the book in her hand, right? It's as a writer, I haven't had that feeling yet of like you're writing being a book. I mean, I would imagine that's just an amazing feeling. And you're exactly right, John W. In that it's the discussions with the editor that we kind of expose what the story, right? He right in the end, she's arguing with the editor about the ending. She says, "Oh, well, in the end, the main character doesn't get with anyone." He says, "No, you have to have the main character get with someone, right?" And so then they're negotiating how much percentage she'll get. She says, "Well, if I'm going to sell my main character into marriage, I might as well get something out of it," right? So there's this like negotiation of what would be expected out of a female character in a story versus what would actually be better for the female character. You kind of get the hint at the end that, maybe Joe will find someone someday, but right now, even though she says she's lonely in one scene, she doesn't feel held down like she necessarily would if she were married. And so obviously, I mean, and we talked about this in the Kira stream, John W., when we were talking about female authorship and female readership in Colette, a great movie. And there's this idea of what will sell, right? And who's reading it. And there's an assumption that, and Jo herself even says, oh, who would read these stories about this domestic troubles? And then, right, the editor's own three little girls come in and go, Dad, please tell us you have the rest of this novel. We want to know what happens to the little women. Just like in Colette, they thought, who would read about this girl, Claudine, right? And then all these women are reading it and want to know more, right? They love to see themselves represented on the page. And I think that's a lot what Little Women is about, is representing childhood on the page, but not just childhood, specifically female childhood, which is a completely different experience, especially back then. As you notice throughout the movie, all four of the daughters are being pressured to marry rich and to marry well. And a lot of that is because their family circumstances are that they kind of hint at that they used to be rich and that they have rich relatives, but that they themselves don't have any more money. So there's this, the rich aunt literally tells Amy, you're the only hope now because Jo is a lost cause. That's a lot of pressure to put on young girls. And Amy, even though she's the one that bought into that narrative the most, she does marry rich, but she also marries for love. She loves Laurie. So it's a little bit of a spin and a question of marriage and love, and can they be the same thing? Or can you get married and then develop love? Or should you fall in love first and then naturally get married, right? These are these kinds of questions. And how much did these girls feel the pressure for marriage and that made them get married versus, if it was actually their natural choice? And that was always hard back then. They say all the time, marriage is an economic proposition. And it absolutely was back then. Amy says, if I have children, they will be his, the money will be his if I inherit any money. So there's this idea of Jo is worried about what she'll give up in marriage, and Amy wants to see what she would gain from marriage and from love.
There's so much in there in what Amy just said. I could never do all of it justice or even close, but just to pick up on a few of the things. Yeah, the tension between practical considerations like money and sort of other sorts of considerations is clearly a theme that gets explored in different contexts. So one is, as Amy said, this choice between love and money, very clearly evinced by Meg's choice, right? She goes for love, she sacrifices money. And that gets discussed a lot. The positive and negative effects of that on her life. Jo also marries someone who isn't rich. She doesn't care about money. She marries someone she loves, or at least fictionally does that. Maybe not really. And then Amy manages to get both. But it's not just love and money. It's also art and money, right? So as we've been talking about before, art has these constraints on it. Louisa May Alcott had to sell the book, and Jo has to sell her book, so she changes the ending. She compromises the art, and this. But then you've got Friedrich saying he has this argument with Jo when he tells her he doesn't like her stories and her stories that are gory and everything, not what she really wants to write. And she defends herself by saying, "Look, I have to sell them," and she says, "Look, Shakespeare wrote for the masses," and Friedrich says that Shakespeare's greatness was that he smuggled his poetry into popular works. And that clearly, I think, is the ambition of Greta Gerwig here. And in her opinion, the ambition of Louisa May Alcott when she wrote the book, right? Greta Gerwig wants to have this be great art while still being sufficiently palatable to people who want to see it, the story that they recognize. And so she tries to accomplish both with this wild ending where it's what really happened, and also with a lot of the things that go on throughout. I have one more thing to say about what Amy said, because there was so much there. Amy mentioned this quote where Jo talks about her loneliness. And I thought that was an example of the way that the movie does a great job of bringing out the complications of these life choices and the nuance of them, right? So there's this traditional idea that marriage solves all the problems, right? All you need is to find a good marriage, and if you don't find that, you don't have anything, like the editor tells her at the very beginning of the movie. But if you do have that, you're set. Everything in life is great. And you could imagine the total opposite view, where it's not important at all. What's important is freedom and other things that you can have on your, the movie sort of seems to depict a balanced view of these things. And the Joe quote that I mentioned is one of the two big examples of that. I'll read you the quote. "Women have minds and souls as well as hearts, ambition and talent as well as beauty, and I'm sick of being told that love is all a woman is fit for. But I am so lonely." Right? So you see the two sides of it, right? The value, the Joe with all of her great talent, has this freedom if she's alone, but also there's loneliness to it. And, Meg, you see the pluses and minuses too for her, right? They really show the difficulty of the poverty, but also the love that she has. And the best example, I think, and then I'll shut up, is Mr. March, when he's officiating at Meg's wedding, says this: "What excessive promises, giving yourself away to get the other. What a thing, what a gift, always given before it is known the cost or the reward." Right? So there's both. This is the marriage, a good marriage, a happy marriage where they love each other, but there's a cost and a reward. And what's the cost? Giving yourself away to get the other. So it's as if you're not totally yourself anymore. You don't have what Joe has as an artist, like all herself. So I thought it was great that the movie showed this subtlety and ambivalence and ambiguity about life, that you give things up, you get things in return. There's good, there's bad. It's complicated. It's not all one thing.
And I think it should also be noted that in a patriarchal society, women have to give more and are expected to give more. We literally create life for our partner, right? And raise their children. And so I think Joe, especially back then, there wasn't birth control. She knew that if she got married, she would have children. So I think there was also this giving your life, not just for your husband, but for, complete other human beings that you create. And even though you create them together, right? Love you, Aaron. Absolutely women are giving more. And they talk a lot about the financial aspect of that. And I really love how many times they talk about the financial part of it. And even though they also talk about love. And I think also a huge theme here that I'm sure we're going to talk about multiple times is female talent in general, right? All four of the girls. We have an actor, right? We have an artist, a writer, and a piano player, right? A pianist, a musician. And we also find out that even though Joe is really ambitious in a lot of ways, a lot of the girls are. Beth, the youngest, right? Is she the youngest? I'm sorry. Is Amy the second youngest?
Amy's the youngest.
Amy's the youngest. Okay, so the second youngest, Beth, she's more shy, so she seems like the baby. But Amy is a little spoiled, so I get that. But Beth, she's so kind, and whenever she sadly passes away, Amy says she was the best of us, right? It was her compassion that was so much like their mother that in a lot of ways made Beth, even though she was the quietest, she shined out of all. She was a kind of a paragon of virtue, right? She was the one who helped the poor family like her mother would have done when her mother was away, and the other girls stay home and they don't really think a second thought about it. And Beth literally gives her life, kind of in the end. She does get over the scarlet fever, but she was or not the second time, right? But she gives her life to save another family. And that's exactly what Marmee, right? What their mother was teaching them. You see their mom constantly working in charities, working towards the war effort. And she really shows that female talent is important, but so is giving back. And I think that their mother, she's probably one of the best mother figures in all literature, really, is their mom. You see how much she cares for them and how much she wants them to be well-rounded, strong women, but that are also compassionate and have also that kind of maternal instincts as well.
Yeah, sorry. I was just thinking I'm not going to say anything better than you guys. You guys have really nailed some excellent points. I was really struck by that, Amy, on this viewing, how good Beth was and how she really took to heart the lessons that her mother taught her, and especially the scene where she's trying to push the other girls to go and help the family, and they're all kind of consumed with their own sort of personal issues, and they're like, we'll do it later. And then the fact that when Beth comes back and they show her the piano, she's obviously overwhelmed by that, but you can see that she's still very much thinking about the family and what they're going through and stuff. So yeah, I think that struck me even more on this second viewing than when I saw the film in theaters.
In addition to those things, Beth is the one who prompts Joe to write Little Women, right?
Yeah.
It's for Beth, right? I think literally she describes it for Beth.
She says, do what Marmee says, do it for someone else, which is just kind of, I teared up a little bit. That really was wonderful line. And it reminds me of the Martin Luther King Jr., quote. I'm not quoting exactly, but that, if you're going to do something, do it for the community, do it for someone else. And Beth really embodied what their mother was trying to teach. And their mother also embodied forgiveness, which Joe eventually forgives Amy, right? So they're really learning from their mother, but Beth is pretty much kind of not an exact copy of their mother, but is really carrying on those values to such an extent that the other girls absolutely respect her, I think, more than anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think this is, as I understand it, a pretty typical portrayal of Beth, that she's sort of pure good. I mean, they even say it in the movie. They have that rundown of evaluating the four of them. They self-evaluate and they say, Joe, bad, Meg, good, Beth, very good, Amy, sort of middling.
Yes.
But yeah,
and I think on my second rewatch, on my rewatch, I think another reason I liked Amy more on this rewatch, and I know that she was portrayed a lot better than in other versions. She's like another blonde girl named Amy I know, and she just kind of says what she thinks. She kind of puts it out there. Like when she cuts her hair, everyone's gasping, and then Amy goes, "That was your one beautiful quality." Amy said, "That was your one beautiful quality," and it just, and everyone else was just taken aback, and like Amy is like straight on to her opinion, and that's like, I obviously relate to that a lot.
Yeah, the Amy character, that to me is one of the big kind of contributions of this version. They really make the Amy character a lot more prominent and a lot more interesting and likable and complicated. I think typically it's more that Joe is the lead, Joe is the main character, and Amy is more there as a kind of antagonist for Joe, kind of a bad guy who burns the book. But here, it's much more balanced. You really see things from Amy's perspective almost as much as from Joe's perspective, and also Florence Pugh, who plays Amy, hits a grand slam, and it's just
I think it's tempting in a film like this where there is no antagonist, so to speak. So to make, one of the girls sort of the quote unquote annoying one, or, the one who the other sisters don't get along with. What I really loved is that Amy is such a balanced, the portrayal of her is so balanced, and that she becomes one of the most sympathetic, characters in the film, and you really understand her. And again, as you said, Florence Pugh is just astonishing. She got an Oscar nomination for this, and it was so well deserved. And I really rather wish she had won. Because I was personally really blown away by that character and her performance.
I think what really made Pugh stand out amongst the other, because all of the women did wonderful, of course, yeah. all four. But Pugh, when they would jump back and forth, you would see Amy with bangs, and that's how you knew she was younger. But she sounded younger. She acted, her voice, her mannerisms. She felt like she was 7 years younger. I mean, the other girls, maybe not as much, especially Joe. She kind of felt like the same person. But what I loved about Pugh is that she was able to have this, especially my favorite scene is when Amy goes, "Joe, wait, I want to come ice skating," and she falls in. And that was right after they'd had that fight, right? That she had burned Joe's writing. And Joe realizes, oh my gosh, my sister could have died because I was mad at her, and it felt like it wasn't worth it. And so what I loved about Amy, or her character, Pugh, how she acted Amy, was that you could feel her being an adult when she's in France and having these more mature views. She's a little bit more realistic about her painting career. She sees that there aren't really famous, women painters. She talks to Laurie about that and says that he says, women aren't allowed into the club of geniuses anyway. And he says, who says who's a genius? And she says, I suppose it's men, right? She's having a lot of adult women realizations, whereas when she's young, I'm going to be the best painter in the world, and so there's this innocence about her in those earlier scenes, in the 7 years earlier scenes, that you see just with her facial expressions and her mannerisms that she's grown up and perhaps had more realistic experiences. And also something that I love that Pugh did well, and that the woman who played Jo did well, was those scenes where, quite frankly, their aunt was playing them against each other. She first said Jo would come to her to France, and all of a sudden, it'll be Amy who will come with her to France. And so it was like the aunt wanted to make them antagonists, and they it's very common in families. You kind of buy into whatever narrative the adults put you in of how you should, interact with each other. And so I really liked that. I really just thought Pugh was so well at showing that, Amy 7 years, now in the story, and then 7 years before. It shows a lot of growth and development. I just think Pugh's range of acting, especially those scenes with Laurie, oh God, her facial expression when he finally confesses, and that face, and she says no, and she looks back and she goes, "You're being mean, Laurie," and I just, that gets me every time, because she's saying, I loved you forever, and you only want me now that Jo's rejected you, and that just really got me right here. I mean, like I said, my first watch, I was Team Jo. I love Jo. She's the best. And now I totally see Amy's side of things way more than when I first saw it.
I hadn't thought of the point you made, Amy, but now that you say it, the point about how Florence Pugh, more than the other actors, really showed a sharp distinction between what she was like 7 years earlier and what she was like 7 years later. That is such a great point and so true. And it's a huge credit to her acting. It's a credit to you also for pointing that out. That's what these streams are supposed to do. And you point and one interest. So when I think, now that you mentioned it, about the difference between younger Amy and older Amy, one of the big differences is kind of ebullience when she was younger, and control when she's older. As you say, she's in this polite society now, she's in Paris, and she's so controlled, unlike when she was younger and she was childlike and, excited. And that makes it all the more noteworthy and interesting when the control in the older Amy breaks. And one example of it breaking is when she first sees Laurie in Paris, right? Yeah. She stops the carriage, and she runs to him, and that's young, childlike Amy. One of the only times that the older Amy is like that, maybe signaling to us that Laurie is what her childhood is all about, and even as an older Laurie and an older Amy, together they can recapture to some degree, in an appropriate way for the adult version of Laurie and Amy, recapture some of what was great about their childhood, or maybe what should have been great if Laurie had, seen Amy back then instead of just seeing Jo.
Yeah, I do want to point out that it's very interesting that we see Amy and Laurie together before we see Laurie and Jo together. So in a way that kind of allows us, the audience member, to root for them as a romantic couple right from the beginning, and which is something you wouldn't have if this was a strict chronological, story. And I think that's really interesting, because we're on Amy's side kind of throughout the film, and even though Laurie has the tendency to be a jerk at times, but still, we're excited for her when the ending comes around, and and they're married, and yeah, it's just great how the framing kind of works in that story's favor.
That's a great.
And it's pretty classic. I think there's a Taylor Swift song that, I was here the whole time, there were all these other girls, but now you finally see me, kind of. It's a trope, but it doesn't feel forced in this movie. It feels natural, and it feels you want Joe to be happy just as much as you want Amy to be happy. And one of the lines I really love is when Amy comes back and she's married to Laurie, and you know, she tells Joe, "I miss Beth," you know, and I don't remember which one it is, but they say, "I miss everything," and you really get this feeling of right in the very end. They show these flashbacks when they're very young kids playing together, and it's like, yeah, they'll never be able to recapture when they were before their father went off to the war, you know, when they were his Little Women and they were all together. And what I love about Little Women as the name is that's what their father calls them. And as you know, as a daughter, your dad has nicknames for you, and it's always special. And it makes you always feel good. Even when you're an adult, he'll still call you whatever little nickname that he called you, right? And it's a reminder of that childhood. And it's also a reminder, Little Women, right? Women, they will eventually become women, right? And they will have to face life and how hard it is, and they're going to miss this childhood and this loss of innocence. And that really, I think, in the end is what this is all about. It's about women, especially back then, growing up with talent and not being able to fully realize that talent, but just by virtue of being born the opposite sex.
Yeah, I think there are two huge points there that that Amy just brought out. One of them, which that she said at the end, the issue of kind of gender issues in the movie and the you know, the obstacles that women faced. That obviously is a huge thing that we should talk a lot about. There's another issue that Amy mentioned before that about the fleeting nature of childhood that I had a thought about. So with you guys leave, can I say my thought about that? Okay. So I was asking myself, why probably the biggest difference between this version and the other versions, including between this version and the book, is that the other versions are linear, right? And the book is linear, apparently, from what I understand, whereas this isn't, right? This breaks the story into two timelines and then weaves the two timelines together, intersperses the two timelines. So the timeline from 1861 to 1868, and then the timeline starting in 1868, the earlier timeline and the later timeline. Why does it do that? Well, there are a bunch of reasons. You know, one thing it does is it enables all sorts of cool things, like the one John pointed out about showing Laurie and Amy together first. And of course, they have this kind of incredibly memorable thing where you show Joe going down in the earlier timeline and seeing Beth alive, and Joe going down in the later timeline and seeing Beth not there because she's died, and it's super powerful. So it enables all sorts of interesting things. But I think the biggest reason is as follows. What's the dividing point between the two timelines? The second timeline begins in the first scene of the movie where Joe is going to is starting to get her work published. And another point that's really crucial in dividing them, very near the end of the first timeline, is the wedding of Meg to John Brooke. In the wedding of Meg to John Brooke, that day, a lot of incredibly important things happen. So Meg leaves the house that we've seen, their whole childhood, the March house, the thing that everyone associates with the story of Little Women. Meg is the first to leave because she marries John Brooke, and she's gone. On that same day, Amy accepts Aunt March's invitation to leave and go to Paris. So she's gone from the house. Also on that same day, Joe turns down Laurie's offer of marriage and ends up going to New York instead, which means she's gone from the house. And by rejecting Laurie, she's effectively rejecting or ending her childhood, because her childhood was with Laurie, but her adulthood is not going to be with Laurie. I think the whole point is that the earlier timeline depicts their childhood, and the later timeline depicts the transition into adulthood. And we see Joe desperately trying to hold on to the childhood, which we can understand because the childhood is so beautiful. And even with its problems and imperfections, still there's this glow about it. It's so amazing how they get along. And the March household has all of this vibrance that Laurie's household doesn't have. Laurie's is, lonely and cold, but the Little Women household is amazing and wonderful. So Jo wants desperately to hold on to childhood, wants it so badly. She basically asks Meg, it symbolically, to marry her on the day that Meg's going to marry John Brooks. She's like, let's you and I go live together, and we'll keep doing what we've been doing. And Meg says no, because Meg recognizes that you can't bottle childhood. It's fleeting by its nature. Time moves forward. It's going to end. You can't hold on to it. But the great paradox of the whole thing, or irony, or the kind of wonderful point about it, is that Jo, by finally accepting that she can't hold on to childhood, she's going to have to become an adult. And what does adulthood mean for her? It means she's going to become this great writer. Only by doing that does she end up bottling her childhood by creating the book Little Women.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to just, like, my literal only commentary to that is, wow, I did not at all think of it that way. That is such a good way to put it. And it does feel like you're talking about this warmth versus this cold and wanting to preserve the childhood. And then she literally does that in book form. And it's not exactly the retelling of their childhood. She makes it happier than it really was. And we also get the sense that, even though their mom is absolutely wonderful, she, I'm sure, has trouble because her husband is gone and she misses her husband, and she sacrifices a lot for her daughters and the war effort and people around them that need help, This is also, yes, this is a great line, Jared. I'm so glad you put this up there. So when Jo tells Meg, don't get married, just be with me, she says, Jo, just because my dreams are not the same as yours doesn't mean they're unimportant. And that is honestly, that's, definitely a feminist line, because this idea of, if women, especially now, if they still want to be housewives and that is their option and they're happy and their partner's okay with it, then that's fine, right? Every decision can, if made with the right mindset, is a feminist decision, no matter what. And so this idea of, we can both be talented women, right? And have different lives. And it doesn't mean that yours is more unimportant than mine. And, I, of course, related to Jo in the very first, because I'm a writer and because I find myself a little bit more independent. But then, you look at Megan, she also is independent in her own ways. And she says she wants a family and she wants to be with John and she loves him. And even though she has trouble with their financial problems, they reconcile that. And she literally sells back the $50 fabric that she had bought and said, I would rather have you than beautiful things. And that is the kind of moral of her particular arc, right? Is that love is more important than money. Amy's kind of arc is that I can have love and money, right? Kind of. And then Jo's is kind of reconciling with loneliness and independence, and perhaps one day, hopefully, finding, something that is fulfilling, but it doesn't necessarily have to be marriage, right? And for Beth, honestly, I see her as the conscience of the whole group. She's their muse. And in the end, she makes them better women. And even though it's very sad that she dies, they all grow because of her and because of having known her. And even though her time on the earth was brief, her light shine, it shone so bright that all of her sisters are going to be forever better people because they knew Beth and they grew up with Beth. And so I think all four of them have these arcs that have not necessarily a satisfying conclusion, but a conclusion nonetheless. And they all lean into their talents. And in a lot of ways, they don't give up, even though Meg says, okay, it's fine. I don't have to worry about acting. They still have these little performances with just them and everything. She still enjoys acting, even though she didn't want to do it for a living. And back then, there was a war going on. I don't think most people were going to the theaters as much. So it was also a difficult time and a very tumultuous time. And I love, there's also another line from Jo that I love, which is another feminist line, kind of, where she says, I wanted to join father in the war. I'm so frustrated that I was born a girl. And that's like literally me every day growing up a little girl. You're so mad at the things you can't do that you forget the things that you can, And that's really what this is about, is realizing what they can do despite the limits, despite the go ahead and drink, the patriarchal control that they're living in.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with everything so much. I just one tiny addition, I thought on the issue of the arc of the different characters, as you said, Meg, right, ends up deciding that she's always liked nice things. She's liked money, but she ends up choosing love over money. With respect to Amy, yes, she gets both love and money, but what she doesn't get is the fulfillment of her ambition, right? She says, well, she wants to be the greatest painter in the world. And as an adult, she comes to realize, what does she say? Talent is different from genius. And I think that she sort of makes her peace with that in a very sort of mature way, that it ends up being okay with her not to be the greatest painter in the world and not to marry the richest possible guy, which she could have done. Fred Vaughn proposes to her. He's even richer than Laurie. Apparently in the book's much richer, though in the movie that's kind of not emphasized. And she goes for Laurie, who brings a lot to the table. She's always loved him and he's rich too. But she doesn't go for unbridled ambition, and so maybe that's part of her arc.
I also just wanted to mention just something real quick. I'm sorry, just as a note. Also, Laurie is half Italian, so there is also with the aunt definitely some racism going in as to why the aunt doesn't want Laurie to be with any of the girls too. So I think that's important to remember as well.
For sure, that's a great point.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't pick up on since I haven't read the book, and it's not really alluded to in the film. So thanks for bringing that up. And I did want to say I do, it is kind of sad for Amy, the fact that she says I want to be great or nothing, and that's such a I find that to be such a sad line. I wish she could be happy, sort of doing the art that, that she does just for the love of it, rather than, needing to be either or. And so part of me hopes that that's something that she still does, even, in the life that she finds with Laurie. Maybe she won't give that up. But
Beth articulates that view. Beth, saintly Beth, says at one point that because they discuss their various arts among themselves, acting for Meg, writing for Joe, painting for Amy, and music for Beth. And Beth says and they're talking about their ambition, especially Joe and Amy are super ambitious. And Beth says, I just want to make my music for us. So absence of ambition, doing it for its own sake. And so, I think you're right, John, about that. And I wanted to make a point too about what Amy was saying about patriarchy and some of these issues of all of the difficulties for women. I was thinking about, the first camera shot of the movie is Joe standing on the outside of a door, right? Who's on the inside? It's this rich white guy, who knows how rich he is, but he is the one who has all the power. He's the one who's going to make the decisions. He's the one who's going to decide how her book ends. And, he's going to control how much money she gets, although in the end she is able to, through great talent and will, to, limit that and to end up having some power for herself. But at the beginning of the movie, she's on the outside looking in, literally on the outside looking in. And that seems to be a recurring theme. Where do she and Laurie dance? Outside, right? Everyone else is on the inside. All this polite society, the people who are accepted are on the inside. Yeah. She and Laurie are dancing on the outside, away from everyone, not accepted. But in the end, she sort of finds this niche. There's clear parallel between that dancing scene with Joe and Laurie and the dancing scene with Joe and Friedrich, where they're in this kind of pub or beer hall with Friedrich's friends after they see a play, I think. Yes, there you go. Oh, boy, John, you are.
That looks wonderful. That's a great shot, John.
Yeah.
John Dub, sorry.
Right.
John W. Dang it.
Right. That's the scene. And so that scene is getting paralleled with, or compared and contrasted with, the dancing scene where Joe dances with Laurie. And with Laurie, they're excluded from polite society. Here, she's found a different society that she is included in. And it's a much more diverse group, and it's diverse in all sorts of ways, socioeconomic, racial, and otherwise. I mean, Friedrich himself talks about what he goes through as an immigrant, being, not accepted in America. And so, but there, she and he are accepted among these other intellectuals and these other people who get them, and who aren't kind of all the things that Joe and the others were told to aspire to.
And I think also Friedrich's character is interesting, and he is the first and really only character to say he didn't like what Joe wrote, right? I mean, there is the editor who crosses out he just says it's too long, right? He has recommendations, but he literally, Friedrich, you think, and when I first saw this, I thought, ooh, this is a cute guy. He's going to say, oh yeah, dear, I love your writing. Like, you always say that when you're kind of into someone that, everything they do is great, And I really found that interesting, because as a writer, this is great, doesn't make you a better writer. It's that constructive criticism, even if it's a little harsh, that really makes you a better writer. And so Joe obviously had a negative reaction to someone saying they didn't like her writing, but it was a moment for growth for her. And it did discourage her a lot. And it also shows how discouraged a girl can be from one man saying he didn't like something, right? That this idea that these men have the authority of what's good and what's not. Whereas you can have, tons and tons of women saying they love your story, and one man says they don't like it, and she doesn't write for a while. So it's also this idea of who has the authority to say what is good literature and what is bad literature. Just like Lori and Amy were talking about what is good art and bad art, it's up to men, right?
Totally agree. But I think in addition to that, it's also the case that Joe herself agrees with Friedrich, right? She doesn't think it's good either, right? She doesn't want to be writing this. And Friedrich even says in the scene, it seems from your reaction like the reason you're so upset is that you think so too.
Yeah, it's okay to think that yourself, but to hear it from somebody else is, the worst possible thing. I do want to, while we're talking about sort of the evaluation of her work, I do want to jump back to that first scene. It is kind of brutal the way it's cut, where you have the editor just like crossing out pages and then just going through, consecutively each page. And it just feels so brutal, the way he, saving the pencil and just marking through the whole page. And you can see she's getting demoralized, like as it happens, to the point where she's actually surprised when he says, we'll take this. And talking about, another mention of the patriarchy, one of the biggest lines from that scene, and it's like, is when he says, if your protagonist is female, make sure she's married by the end or dead.
Either way. Yeah. And he ends it with either way. And it's like, one is preferable than the other, but both also kind of suck during this time period. So yeah. And you see that culminate in the end when she's trying to end it, where the main character ends up with neither guy. And he, strong arms her and says, look, if you have to do it, this is how.
No. It's this equating maybe of death with not being married. Not being married is thought of as death, for a woman in the society. You might as well be dead. Can't be a spinster, then, everyone will hate it. That's just it's not unthinkable. And yeah, I absolutely think, right, the point here is to try to challenge that. But it's hard to challenge it because Greta Gerwig has the story that she's supposed to tell. And in the story, Joe gets together with Friedrich. So how do you do it? This is how she does it. She has Joe get together with Friedrich, but basically tell us that that's fake, that's just so.
And I do want to make a point, because like I said, this is the first time I'd ever taken the story in. So I'll be honest, on my first viewing of this, I wasn't entirely clear on the whole device of this is a fiction and we're being told. I kind of still felt like there was a separation between, okay, this is what she's saying is going to happen in the book she's writing, but but still thinking that what we were seeing on screen probably actually happened. So I have to admit, when I got to that point in the film, like, I was really disappointed that, as we're shown, she marries this guy, especially because tonally that feels so different from everything else that we've seen in the film. And it was only afterward, thinking about the movie, that I realized what Greta Gerwig was doing with the story, and that was the device she was employing, and that it's to a purpose that it feels so out of place with what we've seen prior, because it is out of place, and that's the point. And so that was one of the most gratifying things about seeing the film a second time, was knowing that and absorbing the story. And I think that everything about the ending is just so perfect now. And I love the way how that final sort of idyllic image of the family all gathered around together kind of dissolves into, the shot of the book. And then, we end on Jo smiling at her accomplishment of, having finished her book. It's a beautiful ending. And, but I am sad to say I was a little bit thick on my first viewing and not quite getting, but I think that largely was because it was my first exposure to the story.
Yeah, and I think also they talk directly about that, where she says, the character says the whole time she doesn't want to be married. And the editor says, we don't want consistency in our female characters. And it's like, what? Oh, wow. That's one of the things I look for as a literary critic, is the consistency of the characterization of the characters. If they're going to change, you need to show the character growth progression. And so for it to just be like, boom, she's with Frederick, that's just like, oh, wow. And also Aaron and Kate were having an interesting conversation I've been looking at in the chat, talking about when Frederick, said he didn't like her writing. At that point, it was a kind of a new possible relationship, and she was kind of into him. And like, that really just, when you're kind of mocking on a guy, you're kind of liking a guy. And then when he criticizes you for something, or does something, you think, okay, well, we're not in, it's so rocky. You don't know that much about each other. You don't have an established relationship. And it's almost like, well, I could just cut this off right now if you're going to be like this, whereas if you're in a relationship for longer term and they criticize you, they care about you, have all this history together, you know that they respect you. But in this case, it just sounds like just another man who has another opinion of her, right? A criticism of her.
Yeah.
I do want to interject also, also going back to what I was saying earlier about the structure of the film and sort of the editing, just as starting off the film with Laurie and Amy kind of puts us in their corner romantically, the fact that we start off this film seeing Jo and Frederick, but then he's out of the film until the very end, kind of really hits home this sort of disconnect with the ending, which is why, if you took it as straightforward, it is so unfulfilling, because we don't really have an emotional connection to those two. It doesn't really emotionally make sense. And so I think that kind of adds to the out of place feeling of it.
So a couple of thoughts about this. One, on the issue of, like, I recognize that these are fictional characters. There's no such thing as like the truth about their lives. They don't have any lives outside of what we see. But having said that, to me, I believe she doesn't actually marry Friedrich, in the story, whatever that means, actually. I think that the way that Greta Gerwig views this is she didn't marry him, but she wrote that she married him, and the movie shows us that she married him because the movie itself is operating under financial constraints, and Pete doesn't want to diverge too much from the book because people wouldn't like it or something. So that's my view about that. But I also want to give a little bit of a defense of the Friedrich relationship, at least in the book, because although I haven't read the book, I've read about the book, and from what I understand, Friedrich is ugly in the book. So not only is he penniless, but he's also ugly. And
I have something to say about that when you're done.
And having her get together with him instead of Laurie, who is beautiful and rich, was itself a way for Louisa May Alcott to deliver a somewhat subversive for the time message, and a kind of important and valuable message in a way that I'm about to explain. And I'm certainly not the first to say this, but now it couldn't be as subversive as Greta Gerwig was able to be now. But what it did do was say, okay, we're being told that what's important is looks and money. Instead, think about why she fits better with Friedrich than with Laurie, right? Laurie and Joe get along incredibly well. Like, what's the problem? Laurie's got everything. They're best friends, and he's great looking, and he's got all this money. What's the problem? The problem is that for Laurie, Joe's writing is scribbles, and he can't engage with her intellectually. She's this incredible creative intellectual powerhouse, a genius, the type of genius that Amy wants to be in her painting, and instead is a talent but not a genius. Joe is a genius, and she needs someone who can appreciate her and talk to her in a way that is meaningful to her. And that's what Friedrich can give. He doesn't have anything else. He doesn't have money. He doesn't have looks in the books anyway. Here he's gorgeous, but not in the book. And so it's kind of a triumph of Joe deciding to value the thing that really makes her so makes her so much of who she is, or makes her unique, this incredible talent that she's got that needs to be expressed. And that talent ends up defining not just her work, but also who she loves.
And also, Rodrigo has a good point in the comments. He's talking about, and there is a lot of kind of undertones about birth and natalism and having children, and how when she's looking through the window at her books being printed, it's like a newborn, or it's like a new mother looking on her newborn in the maternity ward, right? Seeing the baby you're looking at it through the window. You can't have it quite yet, but you will soon, and you're so excited, and wow, look what I did. And so I think Rodrigo's absolutely onto something here. And the fact that Joe doesn't want marriage and by default doesn't want children. So her baby is her writing, right? That book,
when
her memories are her babies.
When she holds her book, that's
yes, and holds it close just like you would your child. And so that really shows the amount of energy and love that mothers put into their children is exactly how Joe feels about her writing. And it goes to show that women can have this maternal instincts without becoming a mom. Exactly. We can have maternal instincts about other aspects of life, right? Lots of dog moms, lots of cat moms out there that love their pets, just like a mother would. And I think most people that are actually mothers would say it's not the same as having a child and a human. I get that. But that kind of feeling of wanting to sacrifice for something, right? Joe sacrifices time, blood, sweat, tears. You see those nights where she's staying up writing, and I can totally relate, where you're just like, I just need to get this chapter down. I can't go to sleep yet. I have to have it. It's in my head, and I feel like I have to do it now, and maybe I'll make it better later, but I need to get the basic, down. And same thing, I think with with a child, as you put so much time into it, and a little bit of anxiety around it too, right? And so I think that there's absolutely something going on there with Joe's writing as her child, basically. And she founds a school. Sorry, I just saw Nessie's comment. She also ends up founding a school for boys and girls, right? So she doesn't just go, I'm going to do this women's college, or this girls' school because I'm worried about female talent and women's education. No, she realizes that if you have boys and girls going to school together, they can grow together and mutually respect each other. And boys will grow into men who respect female talent, which is really, I will say once again, this movie is all about female talent, what it means to be a talented woman, and how difficult that is when you have constraints around that, and how you negotiate with the world that is run by men.
Yeah, and what's interesting, since Nessie brought up the school, that's another interesting aspect of the ending, which is kind of ambiguous, where at least part of that ending that we're seeing is in fact true, because she does open the school. So that sort of adds to the ambiguity of what the audience is left to kind of interpret as what may have happened. So even though, I come from a very specific point of view of she doesn't marry Friedrich, but it's still left open to sort of interpretation as much as the individual audience member wants. I will say, jumping back to what you were saying, John, about Friedrich being described as, having no handsome features at all. I was listening to a wonderful interview with Greta Gerwig where she hilariously said, for years and years, we've had, male directors, put glasses on hot women and say that,
yes, it's such a trope,
and say they're
she's ugly now,
you're boring or unattractive, and so she said, so damn it, I was gonna get back at that with Friedrich. So,
and this is maybe a reality check, and I get that it's fiction and everything, but with the law at the time in America, obviously we're on here with a lawyer, maybe he would know a little bit better. If I'm not mistaken, she would have lost her citizenship by marrying Friedrich if he was not an American citizen. Women, if you married a foreigner, I believe you would lose your American citizenship, at least for a certain time in America. I'm not sure if that was the law at the time, but I remember reading about the Chinese Exclusionary Act of the 1800s and such. So through my studies, I've read about how white women would be partners with Chinese men, but never marry them because of risking their citizenship. So there's also a very big racial aspect to this as well, of Friedrich and of Laurie being half Italian. There's this idea of don't just marry a rich man, marry a rich, fully white man. It's also kind of in there as well. The Aunt March, I think, dies, which so she doesn't really have a say, but I would think she would be absolutely against Joe being with a foreigner.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, a rich fully white man like Fred Vaughn.
Yes, exactly, like Fred Vaughn. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like,
but it's also fiction. Once again, I know none of them considered any of this. Once again, it's all fiction. I'm just saying, if you were a woman during the Civil War and you fell in love with a foreigner, I think that your citizenship would be at risk if you wanted to marry.
I would say, though, that it would almost be worth it for me entertaining the thought of her actually marrying Friedrich, just to stick that into Aunt March, even if she's bad, but.
Well, obviously, Aunt Marge still saw a lot in Joe. She gave her the house. I mean, she probably saw she was going to be a spinster forever and would need something. But she also thought, hey, this is a talented young girl. She could have given it to Amy, who she kind of played around with as being her favorite. But I think in the end, Joe was her favorite. And I think by giving her the house, you see that. And she saw that if Joe, and they have that conversation, Joe and the aunt, and she says, so what if you're born rich, then, then you're set, right? And she says, yeah, or you marry a rich guy. That's the way it is. She says, as the aunt, she was born rich, and that's why she's been able to be independent. And so Joe kind of, in the end, by getting the house, is able to be independent. And her aunt, allowed that to happen. It offered that lifestyle to her.
Okay, I'm going to pause this just for a second because, we are actually past the hour mark, so I'm going to do the mid-roll. We just got all caught up in it. So next week, guys, I forgot. I haven't even announced it before, so this is the first time.
And Aaron, I'm sorry. Aaron did some cursory research. It wasn't until 1907 that would have been a thing. I'm so sorry about that.
Okay.
I knew because of what I was reading about that it wasn't until I think the 30s or 40s that was. It wasn't in like 100-year law or anything. It was for a period of time, but that is a consideration that they would not have had to make. So I'm sorry, but thank you, Aaron, for that. Thanks for that Googling for me.
So next week I am doing a stream on the 1977 animated version of The Hobbit, and I'm going to be doing that with the absolutely wonderful Helen, the clueless fangirl, and also Carole Brown and Dan, the voice of Geekdom. So it's going to be a full Tolkien panel, and we're going to have lots of fun. So, you guys won't want to miss that. And I know I'm going to have a blast. What do you guys have? I know we already talked a little bit in the beginning, but if you guys want to chime in again, what you have coming up.
Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to hype my soon-to-be essay about Tyrion and the monkeys, but next in line, I'm either going to write about peach imagery or write about the 5 forts of ET being a parallel to the Great Wall. I haven't decided yet because I am unfortunately, equally excited about both of them. But I've been getting a lot more interested in the idea of peaches and the peach of immortality in Hindu mythology. I've been talking to Nessie here and there on that. And so she's given me a lot of inspiration on writing that. So that it may be peaches next. And I know that Beth's little daughter loves peaches a lot. So I might do that just for her to make that the next essay. So, but that's what I'm hoping to do. And I have titles for like 5 other ideas. When I first started this blog, I thought I'm going to not be able to write about many things. And I'm already just, as I hear people talk about stuff, put it in my notes. So it's going to be quite a blogging life for me. However long I want to do this, I think there will be plenty of material. So.
Excellent. John?
I write essays about A Song of Ice and Fire, symbolism in it, trying to decode the symbolism. You can find them on a website called Red Mice at Play. And the section of that website is Bronsterys' essays. I also have a Bronsterys YouTube channel, and you can find me on Twitter at Bronst6, BRONST 6, numeral 6.
And also, as Nessie says, I am also going to be on Unspun Yarn, hopefully in the near future, to talk about Mulan when it comes out, the live action movie. Obviously, with my interest in China, I'm hoping to bring some insights into that, and just generally my love of the story. I mean, it's a story about female empowerment, which is absolutely my jam. So
yeah, but Amy, you're not super into Disney movies, are you?
No, I actually hate. In fact, when I'm in the shower, I'm very quiet. I do not sing Disney tunes as I'm taking a shower. That's absolutely not a part of my personality. I don't watch them over and over again and got a Disney Plus account just so I can watch them as many times as I want. That's totally not a thing. No, yeah. J-Dubs and I, we've talked about The Little Mermaid and how much we like The Little Mermaid. So yeah, there's not really. Yeah. I like some Disney movies more than others, but there's not a single Disney movie that I hate. Really.
I'm sorry, Amy, but you're just saying about how much we love The Little Mermaid, and we have. Sorry, I'm pointing the wrong way. We have somebody else who might be a little bit nuts about The Little Mermaid, just a little bit.
Wait, are you
John B?
Sorry. Oh yeah. Well, a little nuts. I don't know. I mean, the first time I saw the movie, I watched it again right away. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that we could talk about if we ever do one of these analyses of The Little Mermaid. A lot of people have, like it or don't like it. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
Some of the best music, I think, from that movie. I mean, A Part of Your World, Under the Sea. I mean, these are and the villain song, Ursula's villain song. I will argue, and I will die on this hill, the best villain song now and forever. I don't think anything will ever beat her song. Really, really good.
Be prepared.
Doing Sebastian the Crab is an
second favorite, second best, not the best. I'm sorry, John.
Oh, John,
I can't agree with you on that.
Oh God, this is going to be a showdown when this happens. No, I will say Kate is also really psyched to talk about The Little Mermaid. So I do think the 4 of us will be doing a stream on that in the not too distant future. So
I'll bring a fork and comb my hair with it to start.
Okay, so let's dive back into Little Women. What I love is that so far our discussion has not even we talked beforehand and I was gonna break us down into sections, but we've had this wonderful stream of consciousness discussion about it, and it's been absolutely wonderful. Granted, with I've been so fascinated with what you guys have been bringing to it that I'm just shamelessly like sitting here in the corner just listening. But yeah, so okay, so we can really pick up anywhere because, like I said, we haven't really been following a set area. Do you guys want to talk just about some of the performances in this movie? We've alluded to, some of them, but I mean, just starting right off at the top, Saoirse Ronan is just, I mean, she's just unbelievable. I mean, I've been a fan of hers for a long time. I mean, obviously there's the Tira connection because her first, big role, maybe her first role at all, was Atonement, which she got nominated for Best Supporting Actress for.
Yeah.
And one that I didn't do my homework for the Kira stream. No, I knew it would come back to bite me in the butt again, J-Dubs. Oh, I am going to watch that one, I swear. Darn. No, now I have even another reason to watch it.
Yeah. I loved her in Atonement too, and here. I thought she was amazing. And also in Brooklyn, a movie that I think John W. also likes and thinks she was great in. Yeah. She's an amazing actor, and I thought her performance here was absolutely awesome. Awesome. I hadn't thought of Amy's good critique, which is that maybe there wasn't quite as much of a differentiation by her as there was with Florence Pugh between the younger and the older. But even so, I don't know. I thought that Jo is a really juicy character, right? A really interesting character always. And in this one too, even though Amy gets elevated to kind of contend with Jo for very interesting and very central and important, still to a large degree, it's about Jo. She's the one writing the story. And, without someone doing an incredible job in that role, the movie is going to suffer. The movie is not going to work. And Saoirse Ronan does an incredible job. Yeah. So I loved her. I thought she was fantastic. The energy that, I don't know, and I just believed her. I believed that was Jo.
Yeah, there is a story.
Yeah, and she felt genuine. It didn't feel like just lines on a page. And the small things, just like one of my favorite scenes, other than when Amy falls into the ice, is when Jo is sitting there crying and Amy goes, "Oh, is it about father?" Yeah. And she goes, "No, my hair." And then Amy goes, "I'd feel the same way." And it just, and then she goes, scene.
And then Jo goes, "I know you would."
I know you would. It's such a small scene, but I mean, just and Kate mentioned when she goes, "Merry Christmas World," when she wakes up, her face, the way it brightens, and when she gets mad at Amy, the way it darkens is just, I mean, phenomenal. There's close shots of her face. She puts so much emotion in her face. I would say, other than, Pugh, whenever she changes her face, the way that her facial expression when Laurie says, basically, "I like you." Other than that one scene, I would say Jo's facial expressions are the best in this movie.
Yeah, and I was just going to say there's a story that Greta Gerwig tells. I think it happened at the Oscars when they were all there for Lady Bird, where she tapped Greta Gerwig on the shoulder and said, "So I know you're doing Little Women. I'm playing Jo." Which Greta said was such a Jo thing to do. So,
yes.
So it was fine. I think Meryl Streep pretty much did the same thing. So it's great that these actors just wanted to work with her and work on the film.
And I think that what the two characters that sort of become kind of antagonists are the two most extroverted and out there of the girls, right? And I just love that. What about all these Amy lines? I would literally rewind and watch them again. That's why I stayed up too late watching the movie, is because I kept rewinding for the Amy scenes. Because she had this one line where it was right at the very end when they were encouraging Jo to go after Frederick. And she goes, "Laurie, why are you still standing there? Go get the horses. Thank you." It's just, I love it. It's just the kind of, their mom in Beth and Meg seems kind of more low key. And so to have these two girls, Jo and Amy, that are a lot more out there And really, I think a lot of the reason that they clash is because they're a lot like each other. They stick up for themselves and they say what they think, and they're really true to their convictions, whatever they may be, even if they're different. And so it's one of those classic, they're too much like you, so you don't get along with them kind of tropes.
Definitely.
Yeah, I love seeing the way that they relate to each other and how that shifts over the course of the film. And there's a point earlier in the film where Joe is like, I don't know why I'm like this, when this isn't verbatim, but when my passions get inflamed, there's nothing to hold me back. And you see that gradually throughout the film, she's able to kind of keep that in check, especially with regards to Amy, so that, when Amy says that she's the one who's going to Europe, you can see Joe kind of holding back and saying congratulations. And so I did like seeing that kind of evolution of the way they are together.
For sure. And it's interesting because there's this really memorable exchange in the movie. I thought one of the most memorable for me between Laura Dern's character, Joe's mother, and Joe, where the mother, we see her throughout the movie as basically this perfect embodiment of how to be an adult human being. If Beth is the perfect embodiment of how to be a child, Marmee is the perfect embodiment of how to be an adult. And yet she says to Joe, I see so much of myself in you. And Joe is like, what are you talking about? Which is what it looks like. When we as the viewers think, what are you talking about? Joe is so fiery and says all these, mean-spirited things at times. Yes, for understandable reasons, but nonetheless she says them, whereas her mother never does. And Joe says, you're never angry. And her mother says, I'm angry almost every day of my life. And then Joe says that Joe, aspires to be like her mother, to control her anger. And her mother basically says, no, I'm not like you. And I kind of wish I were in some ways. You're this spectacular talent, this spectacular human being. And it would be wrong to confine that talent, it'd be wrong to put up barriers on it. So don't be like me, be like you, and just kind of let it out. But what's interesting is Joe doesn't exactly do that. I mean, she does. She certainly lets her talent have massive expression through her writing, but she also controls the anger and doesn't let it be directed at her sisters, including at Amy at the crucial moment late in the movie where Amy says, aren't you angry at me for marrying Laurie? And she not only married Laurie, but married Laurie without telling Joe and everything. And this was a big thing, right? Joe wanted to marry Laurie at that point in the movie, unbeknownst to Amy, but she wanted to. Yeah. And Joe says, life is too short to be angry at your sisters, which is incredible because that's the mother's message throughout the movie, but it's the message that Joe expressly rejects in childhood.
Yeah. And I think it goes to another theme that I have on my themes list, which is sisterhood, right? That in the end, even I'm an only child, but so I've heard, even, no matter how much you fight with each other, that you're sisters and that in the end, you have each other. And especially after Beth passes away, Amy and Joe realize that, now, especially with Meg still having her family, that they're all that they have now, right? Is those three core sisters now that Beth is gone. And even though it can never be like it was again, they can keep the memory of Beth, of her love for them, and be better sisters to each other and better to other women and better to other people in general. So this kind of idea of, and especially when men get in the way, sometimes, gal pals and sisters, like things can get complicated, but that you have at the core, you have this female love that is pure and that is important.
Yeah, and there is I just want to mention there's a great scene between after Beth has died, there's a great scene between the three sisters where Amy is actually encouraging Joe to go ahead and with her story, when Joe is thinking that are these things even important? Which is, a good question to ask, considering, we were saying earlier about the Civil War going on, and there's these big, huge events, happening throughout the country. So are sort of domestic, issues of sisterhood and all that important. And Amy's, I think what she says is, writing about them will make them important. And so there's, I just love how that relationship changes. And so that, the more mature Amy now is, is sort of counseling Jo and supporting her and telling her to move forward.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. It's interesting, and very nice, the sort of few but crucial supportive things that Amy and Jo say to each other. I'm really glad that you guys brought out earlier the one on the staircase where Jo is crying because she cut her hair, and who's there to comfort her? Amy, right? The one who burned her book, the one who, Jo said she'd hate forever. Amy comforts Jo there. She's there for her.
But what's so great about that is that it's laced with, those barbs that, the sisters will deliver to you. So it's very tender and loving, but it's almost like they're still almost throwing these half insults at each other, but they're said with loving care,
The only one is the last line of the scene where Jo says, "I know you do." Amy says, "I feel the same way," because it's actually a very empathetic, nice thing that Amy is saying. Jo is crying because her hair is gone. And Jo, who ostensibly doesn't care about her looks, Amy, who does. It's Jo, who ostensibly doesn't care about her looks, who does care here in this scene. She's crying, and Amy shows understanding. She says, "That's exactly how I'd feel," being empathetic, being supportive. And Jo says, "I know it is." And as you say, that's a kind of a dig at Amy. It's like saying, "I know you're superficial." But you could also read it a different way, or as both, as maybe half a barb and half understanding of her sister, right?
Yeah, I think it is a sort of, she understands her, and so there's that love between them. But I think it's just charming that it's half a regression and also half like, I get you and I understand you and thank you for being here for me in this moment.
And it shows the progression isn't linear, right? You fall back, you stumble. And what I think I like about that scene in particular is that they didn't have the word basic and shallow back then, but that's what we would label Amy just on the surface. She worries about her looks, she worries about what other people think, and the optics. And so for Jo, this is important for Jo's character development, in that she realizes, hey, I also care about some shallow, basic things too, like my hair, right? And so I think it's, even though you're right in that it's basically like a backhanded compliment, kind of, she realizes that, hey, Amy is right. Like, this is how she would feel, and this is how Jo, I'm sure when I haven't read the book, but I'm sure her thought process is just for selling her hair was, I just need money. I want to give it to my mom. I want to help her out. And she probably didn't think twice about the aesthetics of it. And then, right, she realizes, oh, wait, I do care about my hair and I care about looking pretty, So it's a little bit of a character growth, in that you can't always be the strong, independent woman that doesn't care about, hair and dresses, because it is also a part of how women express themselves. So, it's a character growth moment, I think, for both of them, because Amy is being, I think, in a lot of ways, genuinely empathetic. And it's also Jo's way of putting herself in Amy's shoes a little bit. Of Amy would have never decided to do that in the first place, so Jo is selfless in that way, but she's not immune from, shallowness. No one really is, especially if you're a woman. So.
Yeah, that's so true. Jo has a lot of selflessness in the movie. I mean, the fact that she wants to go off and fight in the Civil War, it's amazing. This example with her hair, and she, no, it's a little different from selflessness, but she hides behind the others to cry when the father's letters are read. So Jo is a complicated, interesting, layered character. She's not just this intellectual and artistic powerhouse, which she clearly is. Like, that's the main thing. But she also is very deeply feeling and other regarding in a lot of ways. It's not surprising that she's this legendary character in fiction.
Yeah, I do want to make time because I have a feeling we could spend like all the time in the world on each one of these characters. So I do want to move ahead. We've talked a lot about both Saoirse Ronan as well as Florence Pugh. I do want to talk about Timothée Chalamet as Laurie specifically because, I mean, there's a lot of stuff he does in this film, but I have to say one of my favorite scenes in the film is when Jo is talking to her sisters about, inducting a new member into their, group, and they're all like, no, and then she slowly talks them into it. I love the way that Laurie tumbles out.
Yes. And you notice Beth is the first one to say maybe we should let him in, right? Beth, always the best of them, right? And he just pops out of the wardrobe and he starts speaking in that silly, fake British accent they were all speaking. But it's so fun and and the way he acts that scene.
Yeah, and everybody's kind of, like taken aback at first, but then they're all just laughing about it. But yeah, it's the way he plays that, gets into playing that crotchety old man, and it's just such a warm scene that shows the bond of all of them. So yeah, I love that scene, and and Laurie is an interesting character because sometimes he's very likable, and other times he's you just want to smack him. So I don't know. What's your guys' read on him? Because I'm sort of very conflicted about Laurie. I get very happy for Amy in the end because he does seem to straighten himself out, and she obviously loves him quite a bit. But he has the tendency to be kind of rather selfish.
Yeah, I didn't love the Laurie character in the movie quite as much as, say, the Jo or Amy characters, and maybe some of it has to do with the acting and some of it with the writing. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a problem, but it didn't seem to me to be one of the signature strengths of the movie. So, as you say, John, Laurie is supposed to change at the end for Amy. He's supposed to finally deserve her and get it together. He's been kind of dissolute the whole movie, right? He's to the manor born. He doesn't have to do anything. He's never worked a day in his life. He doesn't, and he's just totally unserious. And then he gets worse. He was unserious, but at least kind of a fun, nice guy, a nice friend to the March family. And maybe his greatest quality is that he fully appreciates the March family. Like, just like we do, the viewers, he gets it. He loves the family, not the show, but the whole family.
I did, when I was attempting to make notes for the film, before I realized that any kind of sort of straight narrative discussion was going to be all over the place. But one thing that I did make a note of is that scene where he takes Jo and Meg home, and you just see him looking at the whole family. In that moment, he falls in love with the March family, and it's such a beautiful moment. So like even there, I find stuff to sort of latch onto where, I like that about him, that he has such tender love for all of them. And as you say, that's probably one of his better qualities, John.
For sure. In that scene, when Laura Dern's character introduces herself to him, she says to him, "Call me mother." Laurie doesn't have a mother.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so he enters the March family. He basically becomes one of the children, like a brother to these. Now, not exactly like a brother. He ends up, marrying Amy, but he gets inducted into their group, as you said, in that memorable scene where they effectively make him one of them. And that's what he wants. He wants to be one of them. And credit to him for wanting that, because he's right. They're awesome. That family is the reason that we all watch this and, are consuming this story. So 150 years after it was written, it's because that family is amazing, and Laurie gets it, like the viewer or the reader gets it. He gets it right from the start. That's what he wants. He doesn't want the cold, giant, empty house that he lives in with all of this wealth that's coming to him. Like, that's fine, but what he wants is to be with them. And that's maybe his greatest quality, but we don't really see in the movie. We see him be unserious from the beginning and then get work. Like, all the time, the tutor, poor John Brooke, is trying to teach him stuff. He won't listen. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to learn anything. He doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to work. He doesn't want to study. He doesn't want to learn. Nothing. And he just wants to kind of pal around with the Marches. But the Marches, as Amy talked about, are really talented and hardworking. Like, they develop these significant artistic gifts, whether it's piano, acting, writing, or painting. They all do it. What's Laurie's talent? Nothing. And he doesn't work at anything. He's not talented at it. And then it gets even worse, right? When Joe rejects him, then he starts drinking and acting completely badly embarrassing Amy, which is not okay, right? Not showing up to when he was supposed to see her. Not okay. I mean, it's the bare minimum he can do is to not hurt her, and he doesn't do the bare minimum. And then we're kind of, apparently in the books, the basic idea is that he gets it together eventually when Amy accepts him and they're going to get married. And they hinted it in the movie. Joe says, "What does Amy call you?" And he says, "My lord." And Joe says, "It looks like you deserve it, or you've earned it," or something like that. But we don't really see why. So I think, I don't know, the Laurie character maybe doesn't work quite as perfectly as some of the others do in this version, I think.
Counterpoint, though. I was just going to say, what I liked about Laurie, I was hard on him the first watch. I was a little better on my rewatch. He does have the capacity to apologize. So whenever Meg, and I'm so sorry, I know she's not listening, but Emma Watson, like, obviously the most well-known actors in these movies, and I haven't said her name this whole time. She does a phenomenal job in this scene where she's being called, I believe it was Daisy, and she was pretending to be this high-class girl that she wasn't, and kind of gets caught, by Laurie. And his first question is a little mean, which is, what would Joe think? Which is like, well, that's, come on, you could just be, let her enjoy her night. And you can tell she goes over and she's looking off, at the end of it, and she stopped dancing. And Meg is very full of life at parties. She likes parties and she has a good time. And so then Laurie comes over and he apologizes. So he does show that growth. And then they dance and have a really good time, right? And she gets the night she wanted, which is where she forgot that she was poor, basically. She wanted to live like these other girls were living, if not just for a night. And she says, "Don't tell Joe," right? So even though Meg is the bigger sister, or the older sister, I mean, Joe is kind of the leader or the boss kind of the girls, right?
That's a really good point, Amy. Yeah, I agree with you. You're right. That's a great example of Laurie doing something good. I mean,
he is.
He had to apologize because he was being a jerk in the first place.
He was.
I get that.
Pretty darn crappy. Like, and the fact is, like, I kind of, it's not okay, but I understand the way he is in the, the scenes in the beginning of the film with Amy. They're all coming after he's been rejected by Joe. So you get why he's like that. He really has no reason to be so crappy to Meg in that scene with the two of them, other than maybe he's frustrated that he can tell perhaps that Joe doesn't have the interest in him that he has in her. But honestly, that for me was one of the sort of not worst scenes in terms of like the writing or anything, but worst scenes for a representation of his character. I did not really care for him in that scene, but he does at least apologize, which is more than a lot of men do. So.
And what's interesting is he's in this high society. He was born into it, and he's resentful or mad at a woman for wanting to live a comfortable life. You know, like it's if he were also poor, I could see that, but he literally had it handed to him on a silver plate, and he's saying, "Oh, why would you want this? It's so fake," you know.
And plus, he's giving her crap for, it's like her thing is she's an actress, and she's
playing a part, and she literally says it's like playing a part. Yeah.
I mean, that's yeah. Go ahead, John.
Ooh, John, that wasn't a John sign, it was a John frustration noise, so drink.
Yeah, I agree. It was horrible, and how he acts at the beginning of the scene with her, and there's no excuse. I mean, there would be no excuse anyway, but he doesn't even have the excuse of having been rejected by Joe, because he hasn't been rejected by Joe at that point. So completely agree. If you wanted to be an apologist for him in that scene, and I don't, but if I were like hired as a lawyer to represent him, that's so funny. Nessie is so awesome.
He really does, though.
You are awesome, Nessie. And the stuff Nessie said earlier, put up on the screen a long time ago, was just incredible about how Joe's legacy is passing this on to future generations of women, both in teaching and in her writing. I mean, that was amazing. Oh yes, if I wanted to defend Laurie in that scene, and I don't, but if I had to, here's something you might say. Oh, now has it flown out of my mind? You think, oh no. Oh yes, okay, I think I got it. So maybe you could say that Laurie and Joe get along so well, and they do, obviously, even though she doesn't want to marry him. They're so tight. And maybe one of the things that makes them get along so well is this core similarity in that they both don't want childhood to end. They like the way things are right now, and they want to keep things the way they are right now. And of course, that's impossible, but they don't want to give in to that impossibility. They're fighting about it. And so maybe what makes Laurie so upset in that scene and act so abysmally, because usually Laurie does not act abysmally. He's really nice to all of the sisters, certainly including Meg. So why is he a huge jerk there for no apparent reason? That's out of character for him. Well, maybe what bothers him about it is that he's afraid she's going to marry one of those guys and she's going to leave. And that's what she's really there for. And that's the first thing he says to her. Or one of the things he says to her, he says, "Are you going to marry one of these men?" He's afraid that's going to happen, and it's going to break up the idyllic childhood that he's having with all of them.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just
doesn't make it okay.
I'm absorbing. I really disliked Laurie as a character in the beginning, and I found myself being a lot more sympathetic, and now I might be swinging the other way. I'm going to try and find like more of a neutral way to look at it, because I understand. And I think mainly I would have liked if he would have had one line. I think I would say he was a good character. And that's some line that, and maybe you guys can think of one, a line where he recognizes his privilege and that he was born into a privilege and that these girls weren't. Like, I know he obviously realizes they're at different socioeconomic statuses, but it would have been nice for him to say something or do something that showed a little bit more that he grasped really the realities of that.
That's a great point. A great point.
Oh, that's also, oh my God, Nessie, that's also, once again, another wonderful point. This idea of you marry so that your wife will make you a better man, that really puts a lot of pressure on the woman. And then if you turn out to still be a jerk, then, the woman didn't teach him right, or help him with his development. Yeah, and there's always lines in movies where you make me a better man, this kind of thing. And that might be a compliment, but it's also kind of a threat, and that if you break up with me, I'll be a jerk again, So it's a little two-sided, it's a little double-edged sword there.
Yeah. I'm glad for Nessie's endorsement of the idea that I tentatively advanced that Laurie sucks.
He really does. pretty much. Yeah. I mean, and if they could have maybe had a little bit more of his character development, I would have said, oh, he deserves to be with Amy. But I feel like in the end, he was still earning it, which is fine. You know, there's kind of an assumed fictional future after this timeline, right? But yeah, and the fact that they got married so quickly. But hey, I mean, she loved Laurie and she wanted to be married, and she had already said no to what's his name, Vaughn?
Yeah, Fred Vaughn.
Yeah, Fred Vaughn. So, you know, that's how it worked out. But I really, and I love that scene. We're talking about selflessness and how selfless Beth is. The one moment where you say, wow, Jo is really selfless is when she tears up that letter, when she could have been with Laurie, but she wasn't. And, you know, the letter saying that she wants to be with him, and she realizes she's going to give up any prospect of being with him for her sister. That was her most selfless move in the story. And I think that each of them have selfless moves at different times, like Meg, when she sells the fabric and says, you know, I want to be with you, John. I want, you're my husband and we have children and I'm happy and my happiness is with you and not in pretty things. That's a selfless moment for her. Whereas Beth is just left and right. Like they call it, you know, Saint Beth, right? She was always doing the right thing and doing something very selfless.
Yeah. Amy, can we get your opinion of John Brooke, since we have sisters disagreeing about him? How do you adjudicate that dispute?
I just didn't get much of his character. He seemed like a nice guy, especially when the mom comes back, because you know, Beth is sick, and she makes just a comment about how John is staying with their father, right? And so I thought that was, and that fact that, I mean, they're literally sitting there, kitchen table, going through the finances, and you can tell he's mad, and he doesn't blow up at her, and that really made me and endeared me to his character, because back then, especially, he was within every right to slap her around and tell her to sell it back. And, you know, how dare she, that was do anything without his permission. But instead he goes, I wish I could give this to you. And if this is what you want, then that's, you know, then keep it. But then she says, oh, we'll get you a jacket. And he says, I just can't afford it, my dear. He doesn't say it as a mean or as a way to cut her off. There are financial realities that he is dealing with. And they're and so I obviously I really, even with those little lines, such as that he stayed with the father, his actions are what shows that he loves her more so than Laurie, who is just kind of talking, right? He says what he feels, you know, how much he, you know, and you also see them messing, or like when they're younger, Jo and Laurie kind of playing with each other, and like she kicks him, and like it's a very immature courtship. Whereas with John and Meg, like from the beginning, it was a very mature relationship. You show them at the beach and everyone's running and having fun, and they're sitting there having what looks like a pleasant conversation, you know? And Meg was it seems like Meg, Emma Watson's character, was kind of born for this kind of marriage and kids kind of life. And she's happy with that. And I think John was in a lot of ways the perfect guy for her. If he just had a little money, they would just be more comfortable. But she doesn't. You can tell that even though she likes obviously pretty dresses, she doesn't lose sleep over the fact that she can't have all these nice things because John is such a good guy, basically, and that she genuinely loves him.
Speaking about sort of the beginning of their courtship, I do sort of like the moment when they meet, when, you know, the girls all go over to the Lawrence house, and, you know, and they're talking about education, and he says something to, you know, he's very much sort of a man of the time, when he says, you know, I agree, it's much more proper for ladies to be taught at home. And then she comes back with, only because the schools for women are so abysmal. And he goes, quite right. So it's, you know, he's so in love with her that, you know, even at that point, you know, obviously he's going to agree with whatever she says, but also there's the, you know, showing a progression that he's going to listen to what she has to say and maybe learn from that.
Yeah, I think I feel like that was your take, Amy, on him was really good. And now that will be my opinion. I think it's the opinion I wanted to come to, but I didn't trust myself because Joe disagrees. But I think that Joe is motivated to not like him for the same reason that Laurie maybe was worried when Meg was at that party. Joe just comes out and says that she doesn't want the band to break up, and the band's going to break up if Meg marries John. So Joe is just criticizing John all the time and saying how horrible he is, but he's not horrible. He doesn't. Those criticisms are really illegitimate. He's a good guy, and if there were any doubt, as you say, Amy, the doubt is removed by action. When push comes to shove, he goes to Washington, I think, to help the family when they're in dire need and the father has been hurt. So he's just a good guy, right? He does good things the whole movie. And yeah, the only problem is that he's poor, which is a problem. I think that Meg does lose some sleep over it, but I think in the end, the benefits are worth the cost.
I do really like that that's something that's examined, their sort of struggles with the finances. And actually, this allows me to circle back around to something you were talking about earlier, John, which was sort of the reasons behind the structure of the film. And I know Greta Gerwig, she said that when she went back to read the book for like the first time in 15 years, she was struck by how interesting all the adult stage stuff was. And how in most adaptations, the thing that, people sort of cling on to is the first half of the story where the girls are young and that's sort of the, what people think of as the most important part of the story. But she really wanted to stress, the part of the story where they've actually grown up and they're dealing with these issues. And so by starting off the film that way and flashing back, although she does make a point to say that they're not quite flashbacks because there's forward progression. They're like two separate timelines and they're both moving forward constantly. But by having that structure, it places importance on the story of them as, coming into adulthood, which I think is really great.
And what's interesting is sometimes you'll get the payoff before the setup. So you see the growth, but you don't see what prompted the growth until a little bit later. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you get this setup at the really beginning of one timeline, of what the childhood timeline. And then there's a bunch of flashes back and forth. And then, towards the end of the movie, you get the payoff for that. So I found that really interesting. And you get introduced to concepts at different times. So you find out that Joe rejected Laurie before you even see Joe and Laurie together, if I'm not mistaken. You see Amy and Laurie together first. Mm-hmm. So this kind of thing where you go, oh, I wonder why, which you wouldn't have with a linear novel, right? You wonder, oh, I wonder why Joe rejected this guy, And so then you find out about her general views of marriage and how it seems like for her, it's not necessarily about the man, it's about what she would lose with marriage.
Yeah.
But I actually liked the jumping around. I know I read some very mean reviews online that were not too happy about it. And I love that. And people said the same thing about the Witcher series. And, just take notes or pay attention.
I'll admit, the Witcher confused me at certain points. A second viewing was much better for that. As far as this movie goes, like I was into it from first viewing.
I thought it made the movie. I thought it was, it was a huge part, maybe the biggest part of the genius of this version. It's used to such incredible effect. It's not a parlor trick. It's not just there to be different. It's there. There's no point to it in The Witcher, but there was a point to it here, and some of the points that we've gone into before in this stream, and it was just done so deftly. It was comprehensible. Thank goodness. It was hard. Like the movie is demanding. Actually, right before we came on the air, Amy was saying something that was exactly what I had thought in watching this to prepare. It was just so daunting to prepare for this stream because the movie is jam-packed. It's pretty long, and every scene and practically every camera shot has heft and meaning to it, and something that you could talk about and try to unpack. And it just seemed impossible to do that. The task was so large. Just to understand the movie took tons and tons of effort. But it's very rewarding if you put in that effort.
And also, we've talked about Laurie and we talked about John. I think we don't want to forget about Mr. Lawrence, who is so kind to Beth and who gives her a piano, and who, that scene of him when he first hears her play and he's crying on the stairs, and he's thinking of his late daughter who passed away. And that really, we don't see very many father figures. We know tangentially the father of the Little Women is kind of there. But when he comes back and visits for Christmas and he hugs them and he goes, "Oh, my little women, you've grown so big." You see this love of a father for a daughter. And I saw that a lot with Mr. Lawrence, and that love lingers and it stays and it never really goes away. And so when he was hearing Beth playing that piano, he thought of his daughter specifically. And he also, how tragic then for Beth to also pass away. It's like he's losing a daughter all over again. And so I think the emotional impact of losing a daughter is also kind of constantly being woven throughout this story of especially losing a talented daughter, and this show, this movie is really all about female talent and about valuing female life. It's valuing daughters. And I think Mr. Lawrence is just the perfect character to talk about that. If he could have just been a rich jerk who totally ignored the neighbors, but instead he kind of took in Beth especially as his own. And it was just, really one of the most touching scenes, I think, was when I cried a little bit when he was on the stairs crying, because you do hear tangentially kind of about his daughter at the beginning, but during my rewatch, I that was one of the details I remembered is that his daughter passed away. So that scene meant a lot more on the
Mm-hmm.
rewatch. And a lot of these scenes meant a lot more on the rewatch. Like I noticed how they would set up the next scene so then the jump so well. Like this would be in the future. And it would be Joe and a sick Beth. And she said, "We're going to beat it this time like I did before." And then it goes back to when she had scarlet fever. Like really good setup and really meaningful short scenes that are just, really brilliant. Obviously, we can't praise this movie enough, really.
Yeah, just hats off to Chris Cooper, who plays Mr. Lawrence. And he is one of those actors who, like, if you want to cast the kindly old man who you just love. He is one of those actors that's a go-to name. And I'm not quite sure if he's aged in the past 20 years because he looks about exactly the same. But yeah, it's a lovely performance. And I especially do love that scene between him and Joe near the end of the film, when he's struggling to enter the house and she says, "I know I'm not nearly as good as my sister, but I'll be someone for you to lean on." And oh God, that's just John sigh there because that got me. That was really emotional. And yeah, seeing that relationship between him and Beth throughout the movie was really nice.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, what can I say? I completely agree with everything about what you were saying. The scene where he's sitting on the stairs, as Amy said, and hearing Beth play. Oh my God, it's one of the most touching moments of the movie.
And I also do love that, like, in the scene where they all meet in the Lawrence house, and they're already talking about her coming over to play the piano, but Beth isn't there. So in the scene where where those two characters do meet, they're outside, and he brings it up like it's the spur of the moment thing. They've been planning it. It's like, "Well, you're welcome to come over and play." It's such a cute scene, and
it's also important for Beth's character because that's the first time where she literally moves forward, speaks up, and then goes and hides behind her mom. Like, it shows that she loves music that much that she's willing to come out of her shell for for an opportunity to play the piano. It really shows that even though she's shy and everything, she's passionate too.
The way her face lights up just
lights
really
up.
Gets me.
Yes,
I love it.
It was.
So, all these scenes are great. I can't pick my favorite. They're just all so wonderful.
You're right, Amy. It's incongruous when she does that. I was a little like, what? Because it's so not her. She just comes right out there and says things. And I was so happy, of course, because I want her to take him up on the offer, which she clearly should. It's great for everyone involved, maybe her most of all. But she's not like that, but she does it. She does it. She gets out there. So even she has a character arc, albeit, of course, one that is tragically cut short.
And it also shows that she says, I'm doing it for you and for us, but she also is doing it for herself, just like all of the other girls act, paint, and write for themselves as well. And it's also showing that you can be, like Beth, completely selfless and also have your own personal pursuits that are about your own personal fulfillment. And there's absolutely, like, as long as it doesn't hurt other people, then there's nothing wrong with that at all. Yeah. So that's where I think it's a character growth for her, in that her weakness is literally being too selfless, So it's kind of, you need to move the needle a little bit more towards not selfishness, but but focusing on your own self-happiness, your own happiness, right? And she's always so worried about, her other sisters and their happiness. And that's one time where she does something just for her. Yeah, exactly, Nessie. She didn't ask for anything else for herself but the piano.
And the thing that's funny about it is, it ends up being not just for her. Unbeknownst to her, it's the greatest gift she could give him, because it reminds him of his daughter, and so sad and moving.
Which again, as we've said, just makes it twice as heartbreaking when she dies. I mean,
right. And great point by you.
I know, I'm just gonna be sad this whole time.
Yeah, great point, Amy, that you made, that it's like his second daughter that he's lost, right? He lost the first daughter, and then he's kind of brought back to life a little bit by Beth and her piano playing, and then she dies. I mean, just absolutely.
Yeah, it was still an open wound. It hadn't even begun to scar, and he was wounded again. And it just, it breaks my heart. Like, it literally does. I cry I tear up a couple times in the movie, but I cried twice. And that was when Beth died and when he was sitting on the stairs. And especially because the second time I knew he was going to lose her. So it was extra, extra heartbreaking that he was going to have this experience again. I mean, what an unlucky man to lose his daughter and to lose a surrogate daughter, so close together. And I don't think they say exactly when he lost his daughter, but I think it's hinted at that it was, it wasn't like 15, 20 years ago. Like, it's been more recent, it would seem. I think. I'm just not positive about that.
Do we get to condemn him for disowning his son for marrying an Italian woman?
Oh God, I totally forgot about that. You're right. Yeah, he's not a perfect, I mean, no one's perfect. But yeah, there is also, once again, race comes back into it, and that there is prejudice that someone can, be a good person and also have prejudice, and that makes them a worse person, Yeah, and I there is that. And what's interesting too, though, is that he doesn't seem to hold it against Laurie, though. At least not that I saw, because so is he he's his grandpa or uncle? I can never remember that. Grandfather, yeah.
Right.
So I would say that's absolutely, we should condemn him for that. No argument there. But I would also say, in defense of him, and that he technically, it's not something to blame someone over, but he technically only blamed his son for that and not the child that was produced out of that.
Right. Unlike Aunt March, who does blame Laurie for being half Italian.
Yes. And now that I realize, actually, it would have been that his daughter passed away a while ago. I'm so sorry. I kept thinking that he was Laurie's father, not his grandfather. So there was a generation in between there. I was totally skipping.
No, that's an easy thing.
This is one of those things where I'm like, yes, we should probably condemn him for that, but Chris Cooper is such a nice old man. Can't we just love him?
He's also a racist, nice old man. I mean, their aunt is like, oh, he's half Italian, he's half bad, So
I was hoping
it's a thing.
I was hoping you were going to make an argument that he's excused because of the time period.
No,
right now is not It's not Amy's favorite argument.
J-Dubs knows by now that argument never, it was a different time is my least favorite argument, and you will get a lot of side-eye and angry feminist rage from me for ever making that argument.
I also knew that you're opposed to that argument, so I thought I was teeing you up to make the argument that you hate, but you didn't.
Don't worry, I've been taking notes. It's like, do not use this argument. No, I'm not going to say that, but I think for me, especially since I'm so into filmmaking and, acting and all that stuff. So it's like, I'm really fond of the actor. So I just want to think nice things about him. And the fact that he is such a, a wonderful sort of heartwarming character throughout this. So the tendency is, can we just shove that one thing off to the side?
And like Nessie puts in the comments, he's shown some growth, right, from that. That was an act that he did years ago, and it would seem that he has grown since then. And like I said, he seems to love his grandson just as if, his son would have gotten with a white person. So, that's refreshing. And I do think that there's some growth there that we didn't see the process of, but it's probably there.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those things, again, talking about performance again, I think you can kind of get that conveyed from the performance, even if the writing doesn't spell it out. And that's something that probably shouldn't be spelled out because that's not the focus of the story. So it's kind of left to the audience to kind of interpret. But yeah, it's... Also,
I loved the scene where Amy's hands got hit. And the mom was like, oh, no, he didn't. This is not happening to my daughter. I love that. Whereas back then, a lot of parents would say, oh, we were getting an extra lashing at home, a lick at school and a lick at home, And so the great thing about Marmee is that she it seems like she critically questioned the culture and of parenting that was there at the time, And I think that more than anything makes Marmee such a great mother, is that she doesn't just blindly follow what others say she should do to discipline her children. She doesn't really discipline them necessarily. She guides them, right? They always say, spare the rod, spoil the child. Well, you don't beat sheep with a rod. You guide them with a rod. You move them around to herd them forward, right? So that's been I'm sorry to bring in the Bible, but that's been a completely misinterpreted Bible verse. And that it means if you don't guide your children, they will be spoiled. Literally, they will go bad. They will be bad people, right? Not spoil like we think nowadays, where you're like me being an only child who's spoiled.
Is that a thing that is that a thing that normally happens? Misinterpretation of lines from the Bible?
No, actually, this is the only example, J-Dubs. Okay. There are no other examples in the world or throughout history. So don't worry about it. It's just this one. And now that I've corrected it, I've solved all the problems. So
okay, there we go.
But my point is that my main point is that Marmee is a mother who is leading her daughters to being good people rather than following what she has been told is what you need to do in order to make them ladies, right? That are desirable. So.
Yeah. Were there any other cast members that you guys want to talk about? Because we've kind of jumped around a lot, but I think we've covered most everybody to one degree or another. Was there anybody else you wanted to single out?
I thought Laura Dern was fantastic. I thought Laura Dern was fantastic as Marmee.
Yeah.
Amy, what were you going to say?
I was actually going to talk about Marmee a little more because I love that scene. Yeah. It's such a short scene, but it's so good, and it's great because it's one of the few people of color that are there and have a line. And she's talking to this Black woman, and I have to talk about this scene before we end, which is she says, I don't remember it word for word, but they're basically getting blankets and everything ready for the Union troops who are fighting. They are fighting against slavery essentially, and so she tells her this Black woman, she essentially says that I hate my country or something for this, and then she goes, you should be hating your country now. And she says, I do.
Yeah. It's
oh, good. You remember the line, John. I don't.
I'll live my whole life being ashamed of my country. And she says, you should still be ashamed.
Yeah.
And she goes, I am, or I know, or something to that effect. It's a great scene because in story that's taking place during the actual Civil War, but it's a story about, domestic, life and growing up. I think it is important to sort of at least take a moment to acknowledge sort of the great issues of, of what's going on. And that line really struck me. And I wasn't thinking of it, like just off the top of my head, but I think subconsciously I knew you would love that line, Amy. Just because it's true.
And it's how I feel right now. And I don't mean to bring in real world politics, but I hardcore feel that right now. And I will forever be ashamed because racism is still in the DNA of this country. And I think you couldn't make a movie about this and not have one line about it. Right. And so that's what I loved about it. And I also loved that it showed that you could, dislike the fact that you're in a racist country and want to make your country better, which is exactly how Marmee feels.
Yeah, and part of what's so great about this film is it is, it's a period piece, but it feels so contemporary, and so, and that just goes along with that. Like you said, that's the way we're sort of feeling right now, especially right now, and so I think that was a very important line. And
we have writings from abolitionists. We know people thought this way, that they were against slavery. It wasn't just, it was a different time. Everyone thought that way. No, they were just, able to be more open about it. And, but there were people that, the abolitionists specifically who were marching and who were helping slave revolts, this kind of, the Underground Railroad. There were genuinely white people who saw the light. Who saw, just like the song Amazing Grace is about a man who ran a slave ship and saw that it was wrong. And he through God's grace, for him specifically, he realized that this is wrong in the eyes of God and it should be wrong, for the country. So this kind of, I don't know about the religion of Marmee, that she never says anything about being Christian, but she seems to have a spiritualness about her that is about accepting and loving and being open and fighting for justice, And that's where I think her line about when she talks to Joe and she says, "You remind me of me," I see that as activist Marmee coming out, right? Her passion is for the war effort and for activism, just as Joe's passion is for writing.
Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
There's another line about slavery in there, which is in school. Amy is talking to some of the other girls in the school, and they're saying, why should only, they're saying everyone benefited from slavery. Why should only the South be punished? And Amy says, maybe we should all be punished. So the march is,
progressive. Yeah,
exactly. One more thing about Marmee. There's this tiny little moment in the movie that I absolutely loved, because sometimes, you can tell as much about a character from a really small thing as from the big things. And of course, Marmee has both. She's got all the big things and the small ones. But just reading what Nessie is writing in the stream, always valuable to read that. But there's this moment in the movie where Marmee she encounters this man who has 4 sons who went to war in the Civil War, and for the Union Army, and 2 of them have been killed, and the man doesn't have anything. And Marmee is supposed to give him, as part of her duties for wherever she's working, a blanket, I think. And she takes off the scarf she's wearing from her own neck. This is unremarked upon. No lines in the script about it. It never gets discussed, which is kind of the point, right? Marmee does this totally anonymously. No one's ever going to know. Even the man isn't going to know until later, because she takes off her scarf and she wraps it in the blanket so she can't get credit for what she's doing. And she gives it to him so that he'll have a little bit more of the things to keep him warm. It's just kind of an incredible, selfless act, small but so revealing of what she's all about.
John, thank you.
And right before
so
she
much.
makes that decision, she sees his hands. So
Yes.
it's this idea of She didn't have gloves, but she had a scarf. He could wrap it around, right? She saw a need and she fulfilled it. And that's what makes Marmee just so wonderful.
I want to thank you, John, because when I was watching the movie last night, this was a scene that when it happened, I was like, this is such a small moment, and we're probably going to skip right over it in our discussion. So I'm so glad that you brought it up, because, yeah, it's something that really stuck out to me.
I'm so glad you said that, John. I'm glad you appreciate
it.
Look at the two Johns just having bromance all while I'm over here all alone.
And Amy, no, not all alone, because your point about the gloves was a great point, which I also noticed. The camera really noticeably focuses on his hands. All of this is without any explanation. It all goes without saying. Literally, you've got to figure it all out by watching it, not hearing anyone say any words. And but the reason the camera goes to his hands, I think, is just what you said. It's to show he's not wearing gloves, and therefore that he's in dire need of protection against the winter.
And also, I love his line about if I would have gone if I could, so all I could do was give my sons, and that kind of self-sacrifice. And when that's not possible, your issue, your progeny, right? They take on your heirs, right? They take on your mission, basically.
Watch out, John.
Who is this Here Be Dragons? He lurks around these streams, and he's
a new fan. I've seen him around lately.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to meet him. He sounds cool.
Yeah. I don't know.
Cool channel name too. Here Be Dragons. That's pretty tight.
I don't know. He's been a bit troublesome.
He must be a big fan of that channel. John, what were you going to say?
He's been a bit troublesome. I don't know. You might want to ignore him.
Well, he said now that I'm a biblical scholar, so now I'm a little scared because I'm going to look like I have this long resume, but be a jack of all trades, but a master of none.
So I just want to make a couple quick little notes about some behind the scenes people, which, it's funny I say quick little notes because I could go on and on about each of these things, but we have been going on for a while. The cinematography is just a big thing of this film, and I'm going to try and pronounce his name, York Lasau, I think. And the way that they shoot this film, so that, because even I know that even before they did the color timing in the computer like everybody does, they did actually do some things in camera to differentiate the different time periods color wise, because all the stuff in the present is very cold, and then you have the past, and the fiction is sort of bright and sunny and warm. And I think that's really important to communicating to the audience where you are in the story, because it can get confusing, and some people did have trouble with it. So I think without differentiating it through the cinematography, it could have been even more troublesome for some people who maybe are not paying as close attention. And the film was shot on 35 millimeter film, which I love. You guys know I love that. And I know that Greta Gerwig said that a lot of the actors remarked that it prompted them to up their game while they were shooting, because there's something that's still so formal about shooting on film. It's like you just stand up a little straighter when the cameras are rolling versus if it's digital video. And
I'm sorry. The screen, I legit told John B, put up that screen because I'm just going to stare at your empty bookshelf the whole time and I can't do the stream. And he is so sweet and he put it up for me. And I think this stream has been better because of it. So I'll take credit for that. I'm just saying.
Oh my God, John, do you know I just realized that you're in the same room? I thought you were in a completely different room. Oh my God.
J-Dubs.
No, it makes sense. It looks like a different room.
I feel so deceived.
You're right. It was trickery. Um,
Well, because we were talking about how you have your shelves with your DVDs and your books and everything. I've got my like Chinese looking bookshelf here, and I have OCD, and an empty bookshelf makes me want to claw my eyes out. So
it was an artistic statement.
It's a lie, is what it is, John.
About life. It was not an artistic statement. Never mind. It was a logistical issue.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So, as I was saying before that whole mind-blowing revelation sprouted up, also I want to mention the music by Alexandre Desplat. I mean, he's a wonderful composer anyway, but this in particular was, a very lovely score. And just, I mean, I haven't had time to study it to like break down the themes and stuff, so I'm going to disappoint you guys a little bit there. But just, I mean, from the get-go, when there's no music in the opening scene of the film, but as soon as we cut to Joe running down the street after, having one of her works published, his music comes in, and it's so warm and inviting, and so I really loved it. But yeah, and we've talked a lot about the editing by Nick Hoy, I think his name is, instrumental to the film, obviously. Oh, as long as I'm on editing, we haven't really gushed about the moment of the film, which is the moment that really makes me cry, I have to admit, is the juxtaposition of the scenes with death, and when she gets better and then when she dies.
And she doesn't. Yeah.
I mean, just
John, come on, you're making me cry here on air. Jeez.
Yeah,
the side by it makes it more impactful when you see her get over the sickness, and then when
and also
doesn't happen again.
Joe's sort of the way she acts in each scene, the way she's very panicky in the first scene where she's grabbing onto stuff as she's running downstairs, and then to have that sort of emotional relief of, oh, she's okay. Which also, what makes that moment so incredible is you're not just building upon when you've seen her sick in the prior timeline, but the fact that you've seen her sick in the quote unquote present or future timeline as well. So seeing her better is just, twice as joyous, but then it's all the more grueling when you cut back to the later time, and in that scene, Joe is sort of taking her time going downstairs. She's been here before. She realizes the gravity, and she's terrified of. Yeah, and she's terrified of what she's going to find. And then the juxtaposition of seeing when Beth is sitting down there and Marmee kind of moves to reveal her, versus the later moment when Marmee turns around just in tears and heartbroken, and the way that Joe responds to that, it's just it's an emotional roller coaster.
And Kate and Jared are talking about Kate brought it up, and Jared was kind of talking too about that scene on the porch. I assume that's when they're dancing, right? And the music in that is just, you are completely immersed in those two dancing, and you kind of forget about the party, and the cinematography. I think that's the best, where the cinematography and the music come together in pretty much perfect harmony. That's probably the best scene as far as those two.
Yeah.
It's getting very confusing in the chat, because Kate brought up this great point that we should discuss the dancing on the porch scene. I said, absolutely right, we should discuss that. And she was like, LOL, I was talking about The Witcher, I think. And I was like, what? But then it was,
yeah, I've noticed that.
Oh my God, because I'm sorry, it's my fault, because I talked about how The Witcher jumps around, and now we're talking metatextually about jumping around, and is that good if it has
About 5 minutes ago, I looked over and saw them all embroiled in Witcher discussions, and I was like, "Great, good job, Amy."
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm less peeved by jumping around in The Witcher, but I know that I get the argument that it doesn't feel like like Aaron was saying, that it doesn't necessarily feel like there's a point to that. But in, like, as we've said, in Little Women, it feels like there's a point to that. So
I still don't understand this. Was the porch comment about Little Women or The Witcher? Is there a dancing on the porch scene in The Witcher?
I mean,
I'm gonna assume.
Okay, I think she's just talking about the linear progression on different timeline thing. But anyway, but the porch scene where they're dancing is.
The porch comment is about this one. Okay, so she did mean we should discuss the dancing on the porch scene. And she's right. The dancing on the porch scene is awesome and should be discussed. And even though I criticized the actor who plays Laurie a little bit, not for that scene. That scene, he and Saoirse Ronan cut loose and are incredible. And not everyone who could do the rest of the acting for the movie could have done what they did in that scene. It is, I thought it was magical.
And when they would be silly and then they'd go by the window and, oh, we're just so prim and proper, and then be silly, and, you know, and then they would, and then after a while, they just totally let loose and didn't care. And you really felt like them, and that they were the only two people at that party, you know, and you really felt that when the music came in and really overwhelmed the scene and the dancing. And it was just like you had been transported to this kind of different plane where it was just them.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, there's poignancy to that scene where this is coming after we've already heard that Joe rejected Laurie. So then we get to see the beginning of this relationship. And the joy we feel is, you know, tinged with the foreknowledge that, you know, romantically things won't work out for them. So yeah, once again, the intersecting timelines just adding a whole new layer to things.
Yeah, it is interesting because that's maybe the height of the two of them connecting. Yeah.
Sorry.
That sounds so great.
I want to read that.
I want all of the crossover AU stuff. I want it.
Which, by the way, I do want to bring up, this is ridiculously off topic, but as long as we're talking about writing books, you mentioned something on your stream with Nessie yesterday about, you know, maybe we should have a Wizard of Oz book that, you know, like Wicked takes a look at the story from the point of view of the monkeys. And I was like, Amy, I
know, I kind of want to write that.
Amy, you suggested it, so you need to write it so I can read it.
I'm gonna give the monkeys like terrible childhoods and everything, and really good reasons why they later became evil servants of a wicked witch. Yeah, no, honestly, I love that, where you like I said, like with Wicked, where you take the character that's always the bad guy with what is it, Grendel? I think is also in a very older version of that. I don't know if I'm saying that, but where it takes it from the monster's perspective, right? So it would be like, so honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, it kind of sounds like I should write it.
Okay, so now that we've veered completely off.
Oh, and I might, Aaron's like, I might get sued. That's true.
Well, don't let that get in your way. That's a minor concern. Yeah, and you know, I can't believe we haven't even really mentioned the costume design of this film at all. Obviously, it's gorgeous, and one point that I didn't have a chance to, you know, research it too much, but in one particular case, hilarious. I'm going to talk about the guy's costume in a film literally called Little Women. But an interesting point about Laurie's appearance is that he would be dressed by his grandfather, who would have, much older, suits and stuff. So Laurie is decidedly out of fashion throughout the film, and he's got these proper suits. So that's an interesting. I know that Greta Gerwig said she was really interested in diving into like minute details of things like that of the time, and not just doing things that would be true to the period, but diving into the characters and figuring out what they personally would be wearing and stuff. So I found that to be a pretty interesting observation. But
yeah, there's along the same lines. When we first see Amy in Paris painting, it's super easy to miss, and I missed it a lot until the last time I was looking carefully. That you see her painting this scene. You've got people, models posing for the painting, and I believe it's two women and a man, which itself is interesting because it's sort of like Joe and Amy and Laurie, arguably. But the thing that's definitely going on is Amy's painting this scene, and next to her is some random guy painting the same scene, and she takes note of the difference between how her painting looks and how his painting looks. How her painting looks is true to life, and which was the style up until then. How his painting looks is impressionist, which was the movie in. And so it's kind of maybe, well, who knows exactly what the point is, but the point seems to be something about her, like all this stuff of trying to cling to something that is disappearing, whether it's childhood or the style of painting, or there's progress and the world is changing and their lives are changing, and that change is going to happen whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, and it's I had once again I heard that raised as a discussion point when I was listening to the interview with Gerwig. She mentioned specifically of how things were moving towards impressionism, and so, but that again is another layer onto, as you were just saying, of childhood ending and entering into adulthood. So too with things that were accepted at the time evolving into a new phase. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We've covered a lot in detail. Are there any other areas that you guys want to dive into before we start to, close out?
Believe it or not, actually, I think I've made my points. I know it's surprising. I thought you'd say, "Oh, I have this 5 more points here in my notes, J-Dubs." But no. Actually, I think we've had just a wonderful discussion. I think we've hit a lot of the major points, and like we said, this is a very detailed movie, so we obviously couldn't, do it all. But I absolutely recommend that you rent it. It's available on Amazon, and really take your time watching the movie and rewatch a couple of scenes if they really speak to you. This is absolutely the movie to do that with. And I had a wonderful rewatch, and I hope to rewatch many, many more times. It's a great movie, and especially because I saw it in theaters with my mom. And so my first watching, viewing experience was so wonderful to be with next to my feminist mom, and we were able to really talk about the themes and about the sisters and their dynamic. And the mom, she loved talking about Marmee, so we had a really good time.
Yeah, I apologize, Kate. I needed to study up more on the score. Yeah. The good thing is, though, that I just keep thinking about when I have my eventual discussion on the Lord of the Rings films, I may need like an entire stream just to talk about the score. So I'll make up for it eventually.
I'm sorry, Stephen just did something. So Little Women too, big girls. I'm sorry. It'll have to eventually be big women rather than little women, right? Oh my gosh.
So this is happening, right? He's not joking. I'm expecting it now.
Aaron says, "I demand this." I love it.
Aaron, but what are you talking about? Are you talking about my score discussion? Because she may want to do that with me, actually.
I hope she was demanding the sequel.
Oh, I don't know. It could be either one, but I know that she would be gung ho about doing an all music discussion of Lord of the Rings. Yep.
Oh, the score discussion. Yeah. You're right. You're exactly right, J-Dubs. I should have known it was about something else, of course.
It's one of very few points that Aaron and I are complete simpatico on. So I'm going to grab onto it and hold it tight. So no to the sequel. Yeah, I agreed on that, Kate. Although I'd probably be more interested myself in talking about the John Williams scores, because John Williams. But okay, yeah, I'll just sort of finish up, my piece on this film by saying that having not seen any previous versions of the movie or having read the book, it kind of caught me by surprise how much I loved this movie. It was one of those that I went to go see because it was, one of the awards contenders. And it was about halfway through the movie where I was like, oh my God, I love this movie so much. It's probably my favorite of the year already. It's one of those where you're sitting there and you're just hoping that it sticks the landing so that it confirms what you're feeling, partway through. And it absolutely did. And it was a joy to revisit last night. I think I probably enjoyed it even more. And it's funny that going back to, you guys know my obsession with sort of physical media and all that stuff, where I actually, because of everything going on, I wasn't buying Blu-rays for a while. I was going with buying digital movies, and I bought Little Women on digital, and I started watching about the first 20 minutes, and I was like, nope, this isn't going to work. Nope. So I had to wait to revisit until I actually went ahead and bought the Blu-ray, and it looked absolutely beautiful. So yeah, love the film, and am so overjoyed that we got to spend so much time discussing it. John?
That's all I have, but except to say, again, thank you, John, for bringing us here. It's just such a treat to be able to discuss this movie that we love with one another. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, John. It's a great platform, and it's just wonderful to talk with friends about movies. It's, and then for the whole world to see if they want. So.
Yeah, even though, we were talking before the stream started, I was like, oh, I'm nervous. And you do this every week. And I'm like, I still get nervous every single time.
And it works out every single time, J-Dubs, doesn't it?
Yeah, and again, what I said earlier was the fact that this discussion was just kind of all over the place in the best possible way, but it all works out regardless. And, I felt like we had a fantastic discussion, and yeah, I just enjoyed getting to talk some movies I love with you guys. And part of the most thrilling thing about this, which kind of feeds into me being, I know you're going to grill me for saying this, Amy, because you guys are always saying this is not the case for me at all. But I do feel like I'm a shy, reserved person by my nature. And so I was able to spend a lot of time this stream just listening to all the awesome points you guys were making. And that was just fine by me. But yeah, oh wait, aren't you guys having physical media discussions. Yeah,
I'm the same way with books. I like books, but I think I told John I own 3 DVDs or something. I think he had a heart attack. J-Dubs. I mean, dang. There's 2 Johns.
Yeah, here's the thing though. I've started Amy on collecting digital movies so that I can bit by bit transition her into Blu-rays. I'll get there.
I don't have a Blu-ray player or a DVD player, so his face.
There's still time. It's a process.
Little by little.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I guess that's it. Thank you all for coming by. A reminder, next week is going to be the 1977 animated Hobbit, and I'm going to be doing that with Helen, Carole, and Dan. It's going to be the Tolkien panel, which is going to be great because you guys know how obsessed I am with Tolkien, so this is going to be a chance for me to really geek out. And I admit I have a soft spot in my heart for the animated Hobbit version. It probably is my favorite adaptation of the story, and I love all the cheesy old songs in it as well. So we're gonna have a lot of fun with that. And you guys just want to give your contact information and stuff real quick for anybody who came in late.
Yeah, so the link should be in the description, but follow me on Twitter at Amy Blackfire, and my blog is aswafchineselit.wordpress.com. And I swear next week the essay is coming out, I promise. I'm extremely excited to share all of my thoughts with you. And in the chat, by the way, John B., I have given him 10 options for nicknames, and he has vehemently turned all of them down. So it is John B., you can try all you want. I did JoJo, John Bro, J Bro, JB, like all sorts of things. He hated them all.
I have to admit, like, I'm not going to do it because I know you've made your feelings quite clear on this, but I have to admit, John Braun, that's a good one.
I never liked it.
I did that. I told him, I was like, it's like John Con, and he hated it even more when I said that.
Okay.
So.
John Con doesn't even have anything to do with so I'm on Twitter at Bronst6, BRONST and the numeral 6. You can find my essays about A Song of Ice and Fire on redmiceatplay.com. And you can find my YouTube channel, the Bronsterys YouTube channel. So it'd be great to communicate with anyone who wants to.
Yeah, and you guys are going to be back. You have no choice.
Have you plugged the Slack yet, J-Dubs?
No, I haven't. Obviously, I brought it up. I'm pretty sure every week we have the Here Be Dragons Slack, which is basically home to this channel, Here Be Dragons, and the Unspun Yarn. We all kind of group together there, and the Slack is like, one big private message board for, for all of us to get together and just goof around. There's watch parties, there's Zoom chats, which tend to go all night long.
They're marathons.
Yeah.
At least 10 hours, if not 14. So.
Yeah. And we just goof around a whole lot. It's a great time. And I've loved it so much because I've gotten to meet so many wonderful people and get to know them, these 2 wonderful people included. And yeah, so if you want to join us, go ahead and send a message to either me, Nessie, or Steven, or you can email us at we3dragons@gmail.com. Steven, okay, good. You already put it in there. Good. You're ahead of me. And just go ahead and send us a message and we'll get you in there. It's a wonderful group and we have loads of fun. They are not always at least 10 hours. Yeah, I have to admit, Amy, last week I felt like we ran out of fuel because you weren't there.
Oh, I'm sorry I wasn't there for my extrovert help. I know. I always, yeah, and I also wasn't there to mediate your arguments with Aaron if you had any. So.
No, I think I was pretty well behaved.
Wow. So okay,
Yeah.
that's good to hear. I'm glad. I was a little worried. Yeah, no, I'll definitely be for the next Zoom hangout, guys. Don't worry. Your favorite extrovert and Hufflepuff will be there for you. So.
Excellent. Sorry. Yes, that's right. Jared and Aaron were the ones going off, and it was.
I'm sad I missed that. I love to see Aaron because Aaron always makes wonderful arguments. I love to see her argue with people.
Yeah, it was about Game of Thrones season 8. So,
surprise, surprise! It seems to be the main contention.
Yeah, that was just weird. Although I did make the point of when her and Jared got into it, I just kind of stepped back and was like, you two have it out and I'll just be quiet over here.
Wow, straight rare position for you, being on the outside of the argument.
I know. Okay, so if we're not careful, this may just turn into a Zoom chat itself.
I know, I'm sorry, guys.
Just go on and on and on. Okay, so I guess we'll close out. Thank you guys for coming by. I hope to see you all next week, and make sure you check out all the wonderful stuff that is going on with these people, because they're great, and you should follow them on Twitter and read their stuff, and come hang out with us in the Slack. So, yeah, so that's it. So we will see you guys next week. Have a good night.
Bye.